So I'm simply going to disclose that I wasn't part of this board for any of that.
Good evening. I'd like to call the February 1st, 2016 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. Can we have the roll, please?
Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Spring? Here. Mr. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Spinelli? Here. Ms. Bailey?
Here.
Ms. Barker?
Here.
Mr. Sporhays? He is here.
He is
Mr.
here.
Kange has been excused. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get going, we've been asked by the fire marshal to indicate that emergency exit is not through the typical doors, but they're through either this door or that door, and glad to see that those of you that are here navigated the maze on your way in. So not that way, either of these two ways. We have minutes. Can I have a motion to adopt the minutes for Monday, August 10th, 2015, please? Motion by Mr. Spring, seconded by Danielle. Any comment or discussion? Hearing none, those minutes are adopted. Disclosures. Mr. Spring.
I have none.
Ms. Bailey.
None.
Mr. Walker.
None.
Andre.
Yeah, regarding case 2016-0009, I have exchanged some emails with the petitioner and had a informal meeting regarding the possibility of possibly doing some construction for them, I believe, on this site.
So can I ask you a couple of questions? Andre, do you feel that you have a substantial financial interest or substantial private interest in the matter now before the body? And is that interest a substantial part of the present action?
No, I do not.
One that varies directly and substantially with the outcome?
Possibly, yes.
In the sense that you may be doing contracting work should this project move forward?
Yes.
Could I please have a motion for directing Mr. Spinelli to participate? Thank you, Mr. Spring. Mr. Walker, any discussion? So, Brandon?
So, Commissioner Spinelli, so if they do ultimately build on this site, it sounds like there still is a good chance that you would end up constructing the facility there? Or?
It's a possibility, yes.
Okay.
I mean, I would entertain the idea of
but you
submitting
don't.
a bid.
But at this point, you haven't quoted it. You don't have a contract in place.
No.
I mean, there's no arrangement.
No, I've told them what my houses cost to build, but I don't know that they can build a house on the site. I think they need a commercial building, but I'm not.
Right.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, so the discussion really isn't that far progressed where you gave them a draft contract or anything like that?
No contract.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mr. Spring?
Well, I like staff, I guess, ask a question regarding the procedures. Ex parte requirements, I think, apply to this case, and that so much that we're not allowed to speak to anybody outside of the public hearing about the case. And I believe that's true, correct? And that would be, by definition, a conflict, I think.
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, you're correct in that matter, but also there is the question of an appearance of a conflict of interest. Even if a contract hasn't been signed, there's an appearance of a conflict of interest in that in the future it may occur. And so there's a vested interest could be a vested interest in the outcome of the decision.
Mr. Spinelli?
Just to clarify one thing, we did not discuss this case whatsoever.
So, Mr. Sporhays?
Thank you, Commissioner. The way I kind of read this is that it's not site-specific, but petitioner-specific. Would that be correct, Commissioner Spinelli?
I believe that they were talking to me about building on this site, but we did not talk about this case. We talked about what would basically be covered by a building permit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm not going to be supporting the motion to direct Mr. Spinelli to participate. I think there's been some additional communication and the appearance of a conflict in this case, but it's up for the rest to decide. Please vote. You are recused from that case, Mr. Spinelli, although I'm not sure. Is there somewhere he can go since we don't have a respite area? Go to the library, maybe? Okay, consent agenda. Any items wishing to be pulled from the consent agenda? Mr. Spring.
Yes, give me a second.
Actually, if I could, we didn't finish disclosures. Ms. Barker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will not be voting on any of the items on D1, A through E, the consent agenda, because I was not seated as a member of the commission at the time they were originally considered.
Thank you, Ms. Barker. Mr. Sporhes?
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Notice no conflicts or no besides on case item D1D. I was not present, but I was requested to listen to the tape and the resolution, and I did, so I'll be able to vote on that. I believe I just need to clarify that. Is that correct?
Thank you. That's D as in Delta?
Correct. Other than that, I will not be able to vote on any other case.
I think you were seated for A, but
Same.
that would be true of B, C, and E.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay. And I have no disclosures on the cases before us, though I, too, was absent at the last meeting and will not be voting on B, C, and D. I did, however, listen to the tapes related to E and will be voting on that resolution. Back to the consent agenda. Mr. Spring.
Yes, I would like to pull D1E.
Thank you. Ms. Bailey?
I have no disclosures.
Any items you wish to pull?
No, I do not.
Okay. Brandon?
No.
Mr. Spinelli? Anything else to pull on the consent agenda?
No.
Mitzi or Brandon? No, and I have nothing else. So please vote on...
Please, one other question, I'm sorry. I would like to pull Resolution 2015-037 also. Sorry.
Thank you. Could I get a motion to approve the remaining consent agenda items D1, B, C, and D? It's moved by Mr. Walker, seconded by Ms. Bailey. Please vote. Consent agenda passes. Mr. Spring, D1A, Resolution 2015-037.
Yes, just a clarification on the findings, A1. This case involved the rezoning from, R4 to RO, I believe, and ROSL.
Are you, which...
This is Resolution 2015-037, case number 2015-0049. Wait a second.
Yeah, the description doesn't match the actual resolution.
Yeah, that's, I didn't realize that. So the description's wrong, I believe. I think the case is correct. Yes, the case and resolution are correct, but it's a case involving a rezone from RO and from R4 to ROSL. That was off of Northern Lights. That was a office building that was being proposed. remember?
Yeah, is that what that's from? So this does not match the description that we have right there. Do you have the
That's
resolution?
not what I pulled it, but I'm glad, it's a good catch. That's true. It doesn't match the,
Okay, I just want to make sure we're not actually voting on the resolution also for multifamily design standards as well here, since, so let me just clarify. Does someone have the resolution in front of them for the multifamily design standards? And what number is that? So here's what we're going to do. We are not going to be voting on the resolution related to the multifamily design standards, even though that's what it says, because we don't have that on our agenda correctly numbered. Okay, so let's speak to Resolution 2015-037, which is resolution recommending approval of a rezone of Lot 4, Block 8, Northern Lights Subdivision, Plat P54 from RO to ROSL. Please speak to that resolution, Mr.
yeah,
Spring.
just a clarification. It make me feel better, I think, to make edit the A1 finding. The actual special limitations require that the southern 75 feet of the property shall be developed with a multifamily use. And so it's clear that it can only be multifamily. And this finding seems to indicate that it may not be built as multifamily. It says removing the requirements for 6 dwelling units may relieve some of the residents' concerns should the developer choose not to develop 6 units. To me, that means that we didn't require multifamily, but in fact we did. I think a little clarification would make it a little bit better. I would add, and will provide flexibility to develop multifamily units of various sizes. So there it clarifies that multifamily will still be built, it's just that you don't have to build 6 units.
Could I have you state the adoption of the resolution with the amendment that you're proposing? You make a motion to adopt the resolution with the amendment that you're proposing?
Yes, I move to adopt Resolution 2015-037 with the following amendment to finding A1, adding at the end of the sentence, and will provide flexibility to develop multifamily units of various sizes.
Thank you for that motion, Mr. Spring. Is there a second? Mr. Spinelli, second, and Mr. Walker?
I guess I'm not convinced that that was our intent. And I guess I wanted to open up some discussion on that.
The floor is yours. Please.
So are you, Mr. Spring, are you saying that they would be required to develop multifamily on the site in order to develop? Because so this is the Panda Express. I mean, that's what we're talking about here.
No. I'm sorry. It's not clear, is it? Everything, all the description's wrong, so it's understandable. This is a site that's located near Dawson Street, south of Benson, and it was an office development proposal where it was R4 zoning, and it was Connie Yoshimura, actually. Her realty firm was proposing to build an office and rezone the R4 to ROSL, but she kept the southern. She proposed to keep the southern 75 feet as multifamily, and some of the discussion during the hearing involved, well, that's really 6 units require. If you put 6 units there, it's going to require only that you put 1-bedroom units there, and that seemed to be too much of a constraint. The idea was, yeah, we want multifamily, but do we really want to tell them how many units to put in there? Because, the market should probably decide what kind of unit should be in there. So rather than saying 6 units, we said it should be, southern 75 feet should be multifamily, period. And this finding just seems to indicate that you don't need to do multifamily, so I think that's just I want to correct that.
I agree. And so just to be clear, and for everyone watching us muddle through this is from a resolution back in September. So it's hard enough for us to remember what happened last week, let alone in September. So bear with us here. Mr. Spinelli?
I just wanted to clarify, was there a particular number of units you wanted to clarify, or what, I guess, how do we define multifamily?
No, Mr. Spinelli, this is a specific resolution, right? And I think the idea here was that originally the SL was proposed to say 6. It's going to be multifamily, but I believe we decided that it ought not prescribe 6 units. Just leave the zoning what it was. And it's misleading when you say removing the requirement for 6 dwellings means what? You could do 2 or do 3 or do whatever.
Say the market says, well, we need to provide 3-bedroom apartments. Well, you can't do that with 6 because the only way you get 6 in there, according to their site plan, was to have 1-bedroom units, and that just didn't, make sense to constrain them that much.
Yeah, I guess I was just trying to get at what you're clarifying it to be. Because here it just says less than 6. Or is it any amount of residential units?
Yes, it's
says-
just zoned.
Should the developer choose not to develop 6 units, that to me means it could be anything. It doesn't have to be 6. I don't know. Maybe
I guess I'm wondering what we're trying to clarify. I mean, I know what we're trying to not have. I can read it here, and I get what you're saying.
Okay.
I'm just saying, where are we going? Because to me, it would be multifamily would be between 3, anything 3 and above, I guess. And I just wanted to know, is your intention to limit the number to 3?
No, because the SL does not limit, does not mention anything. So we're just reflecting, I think, that it's just multifamily zoned.
Right.
Not talking about units in our findings. Ms. Bailey?
I just wanted to clarify that now that we have a clarification of which case we're working on, that I will not be able to participate in this since I was not present, and so I'll be abstaining.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Is there any questions for Mr. Spring? He is simply clarifying a finding here, folks. Not changing the decision. That's it. Are we good with that? Could we please vote on the motion? Brandon, you're abstaining?
Yeah, I believe I was out hunting during this time, Mr. Robinson. I don't believe I was present.
Well, our clerk's showing you as being, can we just check that? And I suppose if not, then it's deemed, we check his attendance if he was here? That's what I mean. We're going to check your attendance. I'm going to consider, if you were to have a vote, if you were said to actually be here, what would your vote be? A yes. Thank you, Mr. Sporhes. So that conditionally approves. Could we speak to Resolution 2016-006, related case 2016-0014, an ordinance amending Title 21 regarding assisted living facilities and habilitative care facilities? The reason this item has been pulled, and I listened to the tapes as well, it came to my attention during the course of deliberations. Mr. Spinelli indicated that he was working with someone in relation to the potential of building or constructing an assisted living facility or a habilitative care facility. And Andre, I think on the record you mentioned you may, in fact, have had a conflict. But that was not dealt with from a disclosure standpoint. So I wonder if you could elaborate on that potential conflict as well as the relationship that you have with the person interested in an assisted living facility?
Yeah, I own a piece of R2M property that's large enough to support a large assisted living building. So I've been working and really identifying all the code requirements that go along with a building like that. So I was kind of very familiar with what the code requires and doesn't require of assisted living facilities. There's no contract in place Well, basically, what I did is I said, let me work on this for you and see if I can come up with a building that meets your needs and your budget. And we haven't quite got to that point yet. Everything is just kind of more expensive than what the client can afford. And so that, and I guess I should, I don't know if I mentioned, but it was on an R2M piece of property. Yeah, I did say that.
And this resolution, does it deal with R2M at all in any way, this ordinance? I don't believe it does. Is that correct? Fairly certain. And can I also ask, just for the record, there were no other amendments other than what staff proposed made by either you or any other member of the commission when that was brought forward, is that right?
Correct. I was, I was just having a conversation, I guess, more or less with one of the people that testified recommendations to further restrict R3 zoning.
Could I have a motion retroactively directing Mr. Smelly to participate? Thank you, Mr. Spring, seconded by Mr. Walker. Mr. Spring, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the change in the R2M was. I think, was it a change from permitted to conditional use?
That was what somebody testifying was requesting that we change it. It's permitted in both R2 and R3. She was requesting that we make it conditional in R3 because there's a lot of R3 in the Rabbit Creek area.
And so the ordinance that we received would permit it outright in the R2M.
It's permitted in code today.
And today also, so there's no change in that. And somebody suggested it, and we voted, I think, unanimously to oppose that, I believe.
There was no vote because we just didn't.
We didn't make a motion, right? Okay. Thank you.
I just say I'm going to support the motion. And let me make a distinction here. This is a legislative item. This is a recommendation for the Assembly to adopt general code. I think the fact that Andre is having conversations with someone to explore the possibility of this type of use, and the fact that it was not changed specific to what his lot is, to me, does not constitute a conflict. I can see how the way that it was presented may have appeared to have been an appearance of a conflict, but I don't believe it is, and I'll be voting accordingly. Anyone else wishing to comment? Please vote. Okay, so you were directed to participate. In other words, you were found not to have had a conflict. Could I have a motion to adopt Resolution 2016-006? Thank you, Mr. Spring, seconded by Ms. Bailey. Any discussion? Hearing none, that resolution is adopted. Thank you for bearing with us on that process. Moving on to public hearings. There are two public hearings. The first one is the case 2016-0009, Bird Treatment and Learning Center Incorporated. The second is 2016-0015, cell tower ordinance, which I believe is most likely to be what most of you are here to participate in. Let me read process for public hearing. The procedure by which the public may speak to the Commission at its meeting is: after the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the Chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Commission Rules of Procedures. Petitioners, including all his and her representatives, 10 minutes. Representatives of groups, community councils, PTAs, etc., 5 minutes, and individuals, 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except Commission recommendations to the Assembly, which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the Clerk's Office within 20 days after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the Commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. Staff, can we have the staff report for case 2016-0009?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a conditional use and site plan for an animal control shelter for the Bird Treatment and Learning Center, Bird TLC, and Flight Center and Clinic. The reason that this is being heard under the old code, and the reason that it is a conditional use is that the functions of the Bird Treatment Center were most similar to an animal control shelter. Therefore, it was reviewed under a public hearing for a conditional use. The site contains approximately 4.3 acres. It's located south of Rabbit Creek Road with access to the Old Seward Highway. The site is level along the eastern two-thirds of the parcel, but it does decline sharply along the edge of the property from approximately 104 feet to 28 feet at the southeastern corner of the parcel. The site has been owned by Bird TLC since 1988. A plat was recorded in 2003 to combine 6 parcels into one lot, and the legal description now is Lot 1 Bird TLC subdivision. Also in 2003, the property was rezoned from B1A Local and Neighborhood Business District to PLI SL, Public Lands and Institutions with Special Limitations, by AO 2003-156. The special limitations are outlined in the staff packet on page 4 of the packet, items A through I, and they basically deal with buffer landscaping, transition space for the adjoining residential development in Potter Marsh, prohibition on the outdoor storage, requirement for refuse collection to be within a building or to be screened so it is not visible. There was limitations on signage, 1 pole sign, 1 monument sign. There was a requirement for parking lot illumination and also for compatible building scale and a low profile architecture. The request basically is to ultimately locate all the existing and future Bird TLC facilities on this one site. It currently operates in 2 locations. The Bird Recovery Center is located on King Street. The Flight Center is located on Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. The Flight Center is planned to be relocated, as I understand it, the summer of 2016. Future development includes a 2,400 square foot clinic, which would be the Bird Recovery Center, and a 3,000 square foot learning center. But currently there are no funds for these proposed facilities, so what is to be located there in the near future is the flight center. The site plan generally conforms to the standards established by the zoning special limitations. There is existing natural vegetative buffers and transition space that are being provided as shown on the site plan. The flight center is to be constructed adjacent to existing natural vegetation with minimal loss of forest. Future construction of the proposed 2,400 square foot Bird Recovery Center is to be located adjacent to the flight center, and it does not appear at that location that it would require the removal of any vegetation. It has already been cleared. Also, the learning center, the 3,000 square foot learning center, is not shown on the site plan, and that should be shown on the site plan. There is a proposal to install landscaping along the Old Seward Highway on the frontage that fronts onto the Old Seward Highway, but we do need a landscape plan for the installation of the landscaping. And also, a portion of the 8-foot high fence around the flight center is located within the 25-foot front yard setback, and that is required in the PLI district, and that will need to be addressed either through relocation or redesign of the fence or obtaining a variance from the zoning board. The use does appear to be compatible with the surrounding development and is consistent with adopted plans. With just the flight center in operation, it does not appear that there will be any adverse impact on the adjoining neighborhood, which is comprised largely of single-family large lot subdivisions to the southwest and to the east. Powder Marsh adjoins the south boundary of the site. Traffic will increase when the Recovery Center and the Learning Center are developed on site. As far as utilities, there is a well on site only. Currently, the site is not served by any utilities, although there is an AWWU sanitary sewer main in the old Seward Highway. Currently, there are no plans to connect to the sewer main at this time. Based on the above, the department does recommend approval of the Bird TLC site plan and conditional use, subject to conditions that are found on page 12 through 13 of the packet. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Mr. Spring.
A couple things. It's my understanding a conditional use requires a site plan showing the location of all the facilities that are going to be built, and it also requires a floor plan if there's a building involved, correct?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, that's correct. And the site plan that was circulated shows a floor plan for the clinic, but it, as you mentioned, it does not show the learning center nor a floor plan for the learning center, which on condition 3, 3B, show one of the requirements is to show the location of the future learning center on the site plan, provide detail of the gate to the flight center, provide a landscape plan for the landscaping to be installed along the old Seward Highway right-of-way, and if there are trash receptacles, they should be bear-proof trash receptacles. We did receive a comment that this is a known bear area, and so for future safety of visitors, that should be included.
Through the chair, I really don't have a problem with this, but I'm a little concerned about the minimal approach to meeting the application requirements. I mean, there's too many, in my opinion, there's too many things that are left out of the application and too many things that we put off on staff to approve when I believe it's the commission's responsibility to approve conditional use applications, including site plan, where the buildings are, the building floor plans also, and landscaping. I mean, we should have all that information. We barely got a third of that information in this application. I don't want to be harsh or anything, but I'm really uncomfortable approving a application that doesn't have the majority of the submittal requirements in it. And one other point.
Can I just ask a question on that? So is it staff's belief that what we're approving here is a de facto approval for the flight center, the clinic, and the learning center? Or would those, especially the learning center and the clinic, require that they come back and amend their conditional use?
Mr. Chair, that's a good question, and I tried to cover that with conditions of approval. However, the comment from the Rabbit Creek Community Council does point to that very concern. When it was presented to them, they did not realize it was a phased development. There is no funding for those facilities right now except for the flight center. And they are assuming that this will come back to them when those facilities are going to be implemented. So this could be just an approval for what is shown on the flight center, and requiring them to come back to amend their conditional use and site plan at the point in time when they are ready to construct the clinic and are ready to construct the learning center, and they may or may not happen at the same time.
You will have an opportunity for public comment, yep. Okay, so as it's written right now, it's vague at best of what we're approving, so either way we're going to clarify what the action is, whether we're approving for the whole thing or a portion of it and allowing it to go to staff or requiring it that it come back. When you amend the conditional use, it's a full-blown conditional use permit all over again, is that correct?
Mr. Chair, it's an amendment to the conditional use, so it would go through the review again.
Same public hearing process and all that. Okay. Mr. Spring, did you have anything else?
Excuse me. I had one other question to staff. On the flip side of the site plan, which dated November 2015, there's a schematic of the flight center. Now, there was no reference to the flight center schematic in the conditions of approval. All it did was mention reference the site plan, but not the flight center. So it seems to me we need to include that flight center in there too as a reference so that we know what's going to be built there. We know what we're approving, correct? Would it just be a matter of adding that to the list of approved plans?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, you are correct. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else have questions for staff? Okay, at this time we'd like to open the public hearing. Would the petitioner please come forward? You state your name for the record and spell it for us, and you will have 10 minutes. Would you like to reserve any specific amount of that time for rebuttal?
At this point, no.
Okay.
Yes, I guess I'm wrong.
2 minutes? You got it.
Right, yeah. My name is Guy Runco, G-U-Y-R-U-N-C-O. I'm the Executive Director of the Bird Treatment and Learning Center. We're here today to ask for permission to build a flight center and flight center only. I'm not sure where the rehabilitation center and education center were brought into this, but this is for a flight center, which consists of a roughly 100-foot by 100-foot pen in which large raptors can regain flight strength before being released back to the wild. That's currently on Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, and they are doing construction in the area, and so we're looking to build this on our property.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add?
Unless you have any questions.
I will ask. Are there any questions for the petitioner? Mr. Spring.
There's a condition of approval that staff recommended regarding the fence that's within the right-of-way. Do you have any problems with that? It requires that you either get a variance or you get you actually build it 4 feet in that section within the right-of-way.
Yeah, I think we can address that and easily build it so that it's not within that 25 feet.
So you'll probably end up taking it out of the 20.
That's our plan, yes.
Okay.
Were you going to introduce me?
Sure. This is Elise Huggins. She's our landscape architect, and she will be going.
Thanks. I just didn't want to be forgotten. Okay. Chair Robinson and Commissioners, my name is Elise Huggins. I'm with the firm of Earthscape. We did help prepare this application. When we initially met with staff, we went through a lot of discussion because this property was rezoned for this specific use several years ago. It went from a business zoning to a PLI zoning with specific conditions for this specific use. We met with staff last fall to determine should we go for a conditional use or should we go for a site plan review through the Urban Design Commission, because this is an allowed use in the new code. We relied on staff's opinion and decided to agree with them and submit for a conditional use hearing. And we've been surprised a little bit since then. Their intent is really to get a flight center there. That's what we really need to do. Staff requested information on, well, what would the clinic be and what would it look like? The clinic's not really planned for 10 years, at the very least. The Bird TLC people have been great in going to the community council and coordinating and asking the community council's opinion, and they fully understand the need to go back to the community council when another facility is built. You know, right now what we're really concerned with is the flight center. The flight center is critical for operations. JBEAR's asked that the flight center be removed as soon as possible. And so that's what we're trying to do, is achieve that first goal right now. In terms of the department recommendations, we've actually been working closely with staff on the recommendations and how to go about. So recommendation number 1, that's standard. We have no issues with that. We have no issues with recommendation number 2. We're fine with recommendation 3A. 3B, we did go through a planning session with the Byrd TLC board, and we do have ideas. In order to locate the flight center, we thought it was important to know what all the future uses on that piece of land could be. So we did go through a planning exercise that said, okay, if you have a clinic, a learning center, and a flight center, where should these facilities be on this piece of land? So we went through a site analysis, and we did those typical planning exercises that helped the board make the determination, okay, if we put the flight center at this parcel, of this end of the parcel, then we have room for these other facilities as we grow and as we develop the site. So that's why we even have a discussion of what's going on with those other 2 facilities. Just it helps us understand the best use for that land. So our preference is we can show what we helped the board discover in the process of designing that parcel. We're certainly willing to do that, but we also understand in that willingness that there will be changes in the future. You know, we all know when we make master plans, there are changes. And so we're willing to show what we have, but what we have is very, very basic. It's so providing floor plans at this time for a learning center would, in our minds, be very premature. Let's see, provide a detail of the gate, that is no problem. Oh, I think I misspoke when I said C. The gate detail is no problem. It was B, the learning center, that we would prefer not to have that be a condition of the use, because that's not what we're here for. We have no problem providing a landscape plan. When we evaluated the flight center, the reason we didn't provide a landscape plan is because we do meet the buffer criteria for the location of the flight center. We've been working with Byrd Treatment Learning Center, and right now the plan is to revegetate using neighborhoods, using schools. We'd like to do an educational program and involve the kids in a revegetation plan for the site, and I expect that will move forward this spring, providing a landscape plan showing that's not a problem at all. But the reason, Mr. Spring, that we did not do that is because we thought we met that condition with the existing landscape materials. Let's see, bear-proof trash receptacles. We have no problem providing bear-proof trash receptacles, except this is in conflict with the other condition that says we shall not provide trash outside of the facility. So if we'd prefer not to provide bear-proof trash receptacles inside of the current shed. I understand as the site develops and we get public to the site and there are need for picnics and things like that, then that does make sense and that condition makes sense. But right now with the facility we're developing, I'm not sure it's a valid condition. We will meet condition number 4. We've worked with WMS people at the municipality for a drainage plan, and they understand the phased nature of this project. So we've already communicated with them. We are in the process of obtaining a driveway permit from ADOT. Again, that appears to be a very smooth process. DOT is in favor of making driveway permits consistent along that whole old Seward Highway. We have discussed with the municipal traffic engineer required improvements to the parking lot. And with the flight center, the traffic engineer doesn't think that we'll need any significant improvements. With the clinic and any other buildings on the site, we'd be going back to traffic engineering and working with them on improvements to the parking lot. And the fence, we're actually working with the staff at BTLC to determine what is the best way to build a fence on that. Initially, we thought the fence was to keep people out, and we've since learned it's probably more important to worry about the bears. And so we'll be working with Fish and Game to determine what is the best type of fence. Right now, we're exploring options in terms of electrifying the fence because that's what Fish and Game is telling us is what's needed to keep the bears out. So with that, I hope we still have 2 minutes left in case you have questions.
You have 3. Let me.
Awesome.
Are there questions for the petitioner? So just to maybe for my edification again, walk me through why you're doing a conditional use permit and not a site plan review.
And Margaret might have to help me with this. There was initial concern from staff because of timing that we would have to go before the Community Council in order to submit the application for the Urban Design Commission. Our initial preference was to go before UDC and do it as part of the 2016 code. So I know there were a lot of backdoor conversations. Margaret,
maybe I can summarize. It sounds like you're just caught between the calendar year process more than anything. It sounds like.
yeah, and staff was trying to help, and we're all trying to figure out, okay, what's the most expeditious way, and what. I think that's exactly right.
Okay, and it's not that you're not communicating with the community council. It had to do with the formal process in front of the community council.
Yeah, I think there was question on what is a community meeting, and can a community meeting occur at a community council, or does it have to be a fully notified meeting? And so the conditional use process made that, I guess, a little bit cleaner. We have the staff, BTLC staff has gone before, well, you can see they have gone before the community council with the notes you have.
Okay, and just to be clear, you're basically with 3B, show the location of the future learning center. You'd rather that not be a condition and acknowledge that you're going to come back when you're ready to show that.
That's our preference. We think that strengthens it for your decision making. We think that strengthens it from our position.
And you know, on the same notion, you sort of show where the clinic is, but you don't offer details for the clinic. So if you were to do the clinic, you'd also have to come back and show.
That was our expectation.
Okay, very good. Mr. Walker, anything?
I'm out of the queue.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. You have 3 minutes remaining.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to testify? Please come forward, state your name for the record.
My name is Adam Lees. Last name is Lees. I'm coming before you on behalf of the Rabbit Creek Community Council, which I'm the chair. We wanted to testify today that we do support this conditional use permit. Bird TLC has been very honest, very forthright in coming to the council over the years since before I was involved on the council, and we were happy to receive their support. However, reviewing the application, we did have some concerns, and some that we would hope that would not be either granted variances or would be placed by this commission as requirements. One major issue we had, which seems to have caused some confusion here, was the phased nature. We were presented to on the nature of the flight cage. We do support that, provided that the conditions listed in AO 2003-156, especially as concerned neighborhood screening, the third condition, be maintained, and that a permanent vegetative buffer be required beyond the ADOT right-of-way. There was very serious concerns in our council over the site plan showing that the perimeter fence actually breached the 15-foot buffer as well as the 25-foot buffer, and that any future plans for a permanent storage shed also went through that mandatory 25-foot setback. We understand that the Bird Center does plan to plant trees, but we would like a permanent buffer to be a requirement beyond the ADOT right-of-way. St. Tikhon Church just up the road actually cut down their entire right-of-way when they said they wouldn't, so you can understand our concern on that. And the third aspect was the requirement for proven bear-proof measures. The grizzly bears especially love Potter Marsh, especially during salmon spawn season. There were questions from our council over the amount of time that feeding for the birds would be out and what this could attract as far as unwelcome visitors, and that these complying with the AO 2003-156 on refuse collection, that the shed be shown to either be electrified or some way to be completely bear deterrent, especially as live meat was considered to be on this. I will withhold the rest of my time for questions.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Anyone else wishing to testify?
My name is Diane Holmes, In 2003, I testified before you that the residents were glad that Bird TLC was progressing with their plans at the old Rabbit Creek Inn site. It has been a long time coming. One concern from nearly everyone and the council in 2003 was over vegetative buffers. The conditions of that rezone required buffers, yet the current plan clearly shows one portion of the flight cage will extend into, it's not clear, the front setback or DOT's right of way. TLC has said they intend to add more trees and will maintain as much existing vegetation as possible while being hidden from the highway. The phrase, as much as possible, has no teeth in it, and their goal will be impossible to achieve if the buffers are not theirs. This may seem minor to you, but we know what can and has happened with an example literally next door. In 2005, the plat for a new church contained the agreed-upon condition for a vegetative buffer to remain, all 75 feet of it. Some, if not all, was actually DOT's right-of-way. The pictures that I will pass you will show the whole buffer has been stripped. The resultant fence and sparse, scraggly spruce do nothing to remedy the original condition for a buffer. Along this road that many consider an extension of Seward Highway's scenic byway status. Because of this incident, Title 21 was amended to include transition and buffering standards 21-45-200, the purpose being to mitigate the impacts of non-residential lands upon residential. When the old Seward Highway in this location received its much-needed upgrade, it could remove their buffer completely, thus exposing the flight cage with associated noise and curious onlookers, which Bird TLC says they wish to avoid. The staff report mentions a few options for this buffer incursion. One is to get a variance for the fence. However, this does nothing to satisfy the real issue of keeping buffers. Another is to modify the building, which would satisfy the 2003 condition. And I ask that you require the corner of the cage to be modified so it does not extend into the right-of-way or front setback, and to maintain the setbacks as buffers. And last, I ask also that you place a condition that the pile driver will operate outside of the nesting season because there is an eagle's nest nearby, providing it still nests there this year. This issue was not addressed in the staff report.
Thank you, Ms. Holmes. Any questions? And just to be clear, the landscaping that you're asking for is that it be consistent with the special limitation of the zoning. Is that correct?
Of the 2003.
The special
and that
limitation.
also the new Title 21 clause. Is that what you're asking?
Well, I will ask for staff what they intend by that, but I see a request for a landscape plan. You heard testimony here tonight that we don't have a landscape plan to review in the first place, right? And so a condition is that they show a landscape plan, but presumably, and I'll ask Margaret on this, that it would be to show that the landscape plan is consistent with number C of the special limitations. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair. This will continue to be reviewed under the old Title 21. It was submitted under the old Title 21, so we won't reference the new Title 21 on this one. It's too difficult to mix and mix the codes because you don't know which code it has to refer to. So this came in under the old Title 21, and it AMC 21-45-200 is the standard against which it would be reviewed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Holmes. Anyone else wishing to testify? One more taker.
Hi, my name is Karen Deckman Bond. I'll make this very brief. We've got lots of other things to do tonight. I'm with the board with Bird TLC, and I just wanted to make a really brief comment. We like trees. They're where birds like to live. we're not planning on coming into this property and strip mining it. I just donated 300 trees to a national forest through the Arbor Foundation, and I'm looking forward to doing the same on this property. So I'd like to dispel any concerns about where our interests lie. We very much liked working with the community council and respect the needs and the wishes of the community there. We certainly do not want to draw attention to ourselves, and the more discreet we are and the more attractive our building is, the better it is for us and it is for the community and the birds. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. You had a question, Ms. Bailey. You had a question?
Hi. I was wondering, given Bird TLC's sounds like you're okay with having a screen buffer, would you be okay with that being added on as a condition to?
I don't know that I could represent the organization in saying that, but we're very pro being buffered and treed. And again, we don't want our birds to be hurt, and we don't want to be calling attention to ourselves in this way. And also, we want more trees. We want as many trees as we can on that property because we're kind of fond of the environment. That's kind of one of the things we're very interested in. And preserving environments for birds is very important to us. So that would include trees and shrubs. So whereas I can't speak for my organization as to that, I would feel that would be presumptuous. That's generally the feeling we have at all of our meetings. Does that help answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify? Could the petitioner please come up? Yeah, you have 3 minutes remaining for rebuttal.
Before Guy speaks, again, Elise Huggins through the chair. There already is a condition in the special limitation that requires us to do buffer landscaping. We will provide a landscape plan that shows Title 21 buffer landscaping, and I'm sure we're going to do a lot more than the minimum 10-foot evergreen tree on center with 3 shrubs per tree. There's no doubt in my mind that we're going to exceed that expectation. I get a little worried when we have duplicate conditions, so we would just like clarity that we meet the special limitation that does require us to do buffer landscaping. It's one of the things I didn't note before. The flight center is not a public facility. It's something that BLTC wants to hide from the public as much as possible. We want to downplay that its existence there. So the revegetation effort has been always part of the plan.
Per U.S. Fish and Wildlife regulations, the public is not allowed in the rehabilitation area. So this flight and the flight center would not be a public facility at all. Probably have 2 or 3 people going in throughout the day, and we plan to have our trash in an enclosed, attached building.
And I might note, that reminds me, the fence. We originally did put the fence in the buffer. It was our way of getting a little bit more space. Our goal on that fence is to have it completely disappear in the landscape, similar to the fence at the Alaska Botanical Garden, where we're using darker color post and we're using a welded wire mesh fabric, so it will not be a chain link fence. We don't like the appearance, the industrial appearance of that. That said, now that we know we can't put the fence in the buffer, we will be relocating the fence so it's outside, so it doesn't penetrate that buffer at all, so that it will be completely, it'll basically tie, if you look into your drawings and you see where the shed is, the fence will basically tie into the shed and go back from there. So we'll keep that, the tall, because in the buffer we're only allowed a 4-foot fence, and a 4-foot fence does nothing for us. So we will redesign that to meet that condition.
That's all I have, unless anybody has any other questions.
I think I do have one question for you,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Walker.
Through the chair, I had a couple of questions here. Will you be keeping meat inside the shed?
Mostly what we're going to have at this facility are eagles, and they're eating salmon. So there will be salmon kept inside of a freezer somewhere, either at our rehabilitation clinic on King Street or in an enclosed building attached to the flight center.
Okay. So is there, what do you do now out at J-Bear when you guys are doing this? Is there kind of a best practice, like you keep it in the freezer and it's
Sure,
locked up
of course.
inside the building?
Yeah, we only feed what the eagles need for the day, so there's not going to be a whole lot of piling up of salmon in the...
Oh, so it's not stored there. So let's say you leave for the night and you're coming back tomorrow with the eagles. You're not leaving salmon in the freezer on site? overnight or anything like that, or?
Well, it will be in a freezer on site inside of an attached enclosed building,
Okay.
a small shed.
Okay.
Yeah,
And you're doing that now?
that is how we do it now, right? And we've been there for over 25 years there on Jay Bear. We've never had an issue with any bears trying to get in or out. And I would dare say that there are probably more bears in the current location than where we're planning on moving to it, above Potter Marsh there.
Okay. And then you don't intend to have any trash receptacles outside? Is what
No, all of our trash will be inside.
Okay.
So, the talk of a bear-proof container is really moot, in my opinion. If it's going to be indoors. So,
Would you
and we do haul that out daily. So.
Okay. Would you object to us maybe modifying this language just to say that if there is an outdoor trash receptacle?
That's fine.
Or something? Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We heard a comment about the pile driving.
Right.
What technology are you guys going to be using? Is it going to be like helical piers or actual driven piles, or?
Actually, in the application, we do discuss that we will be not doing anything within the migratory bird season.
Okay.
So we will meet that requirement.
Okay.
Obviously, we're probably more concerned about this than the community council. It's kind of what we do. So. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So my last question is I think that one of the comments, the last public comment there, was actually saying that the flight center itself really kind of almost touches this 25-foot setback. And I think their concern was, was making sure that there's appropriate buffering in there. So what you're saying is that basically where the fence currently protrudes into the setbacks, you're going to pull that back, and it'll probably have some more angles there where it intersects back with the flight center.
That's correct. The actual flight center, that fence is something new. On Jay Bear, we don't have that fence. That fence the idea was to go 10 feet outside of the flight center with an additional perimeter fence.
So that would just keep a bear from approaching this delicate enclosure that birds are flying around inside of.
It was the bear, and initially it was a people fence. It was to keep people away from the edges of it. So it was just that much more of an area. If a kid came up, it was just that much harder for them to go past that fence into the other fence, into the flight pen fence.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. No further questions. At this point, we'd like to close the public hearing. And what is the wish of the body? Mr. Spring.
I have a question for staff, just so we get our amendments correct. It seems like we need to change 3A under the department recommendations regarding the site plan. So that site plan shows, the clinic site as well as the floor plans. Do we just, to make it correspond to what we're thinking, that it's just going to be a flight center, do we need to ask for a revision to that site plan that eliminates the clinic?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, I think you're correct, because when I looked at the site plan, I thought that's what they were asking for. And so if it's only the flight center and the security fencing, that's probably what they should show, so that there isn't confusion as to what is being acted upon with this request. So that, and it should be coupled with a condition that future amendments will have to go forward to the Planning and Zoning Commission for review and approval, as the Rabbit Creek Community Council was anticipating. So I thought this was the site plan for everything. Based on reading and rereading the application, I thought everything was discussed in the application. So I thought, okay, this is everything, so you better put the Learning Center in there too. And I was confused.
Through the chair, I'm just trying to figure out what wording to put in so we got this right. So you're saying leave it the same and add something that says future amendments will be required in order to approve, future conditional use amendments will be needed in order to approve the clinic and learning center? Is that would be sufficient?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, I think it would be subsequent development of the flight center shall be reviewed and approved in a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Subsequent development beyond the flight center.
Beyond the flight center.
I think it's fine to show something conceptually, but they're going to come back. Any other questions? I think Mr. Spring's getting ready. You want to take it?
I'll make a motion
Thank you.
to approve the conditional use and site plan for an animal control shelter for the bird treatment center. The bird treatment, I'm going to say flight center, and leave out the learning center and clinic. So that'll help, I think, a little bit. Subject to the conditions of approval recommended by staff on page 12 of the 12 and 13 of the report, with the following amendments. One involves 3E, and I'm hoping I get this right for Brandon, what he was intending to do. All outdoor bear-proof trash receptacles, all outdoor trash receptacles shall be bear-proof. Second amendment would be number 8. Subsequent development beyond the flight center will require a conditional use amendment. And one other final amendment would be labeled 3E, which say as part of the plans that are being approved, would reference the flight center details dated November 2015, which shows on the opposite side of the site plan, which details the dimensions and additional information regarding the actual construction of the flight center itself.
Thank you. And you called that 3E. Was there a reason you called it 3E? Did you delete 3B? Is that why it became 3E? Get your mic.
Good point. I think what I would rather do instead is delete 3B as an amendment, since we no longer are going to require showing the learning center on site plan, and replace that with that new site plan reference regarding the details of the flight center itself.
Okay. To incorporate the back page of the concept
Yes.
plan. Okay. Laura, are you good with that? Okay. Can I have a second, please? Thank you, Mr. Sporhase. Any discussion? Please vote. That conditional use permit is approved. Any findings? Mr. Spring.
Yes, I find that the conditional use for the bird treatment flight center meets the policies and goals and intent of the Hillside District Plan. It also meets the requirements set forth as special limitations of the rezoning, Assembly AO 2003-156, and that there's a real need to relocate the flight center at this time in order to continue the good work that the people at the Bird Treatment Center are currently doing.
Thank you. I'd simply like to add that the petitioner is willing to remove the fence from the existing landscape buffer and front yard setback per the community's desires. Mr. Sporhays.
I think just as a finding of fact that we have the community council's support with the department recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Sporhays. I'm going to take about a 5-minute break, get Mr. Spinelli back here, and then we'll get a staff report and then open testimony on the cell tower ordinance. We're going to move forward with case 2016-15. Those of you wishing to have a conversation, if you could head out into the library or the corridor, that'd be appreciated. We're going to start with a staff report, have a public hearing. Just to remind those of you, our action here, if in fact we take a final recommendation action here tonight, we are recommending the adoption of code to the Anchorage Assembly. So whatever we do here tonight, our action is not final, and there's also, I believe, there's currently a public hearing scheduled at the Assembly. I want to say that it's the February 23rd. The desire of the Assembly, I think, is that we be done with our action before they open that public hearing, and so that'll depend to some degree on whether we actually complete deliberations here tonight. But we're going to have an opportunity to hear from those of you, and we're going to start by hearing from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One item to note before I begin, policy or written comments on cases are usually accepted up until 1 p.m. Friday before a commission meeting. The planning administration staff today went above and beyond to include as many comments as they received up until 3:30 p.m. today when it was time to print these supplementary packets off. We apologize. There may be some comments that were received but not in the public record at this time. The Community and Economic Development Committee formed a cell tower working group in early August to amend Title 21 for telecommunication facilities, including cell towers. As this was a working group not attended by planning staff, it appears by documents from August 12th that some of the history behind the need for a revision is the tower code was not revised in the new code early process, and after proposed revisions raised concerns within the telecommunication industry, it was determined that the tower code would be revised after an approval of the new code. The cell tower working group drafted the ordinance, comparison chart, and a use category table showing where different types of towers may locate within the different zoning districts, which is presented today. However, after the commissioners' packets were mailed out, a rather large number of questions have been raised from the local utility, the community councils submitting revisions, legal questions from the cell industry, and citizens regarding this ordinance, none of which have been addressed by the cell tower working group. This is a very complicated ordinance that the municipal legal staff has not reviewed for possible legality or ramifications of adopting some of these items. While the Planning and Zoning Commission is being asked to make a recommendation to the Assembly, staff feels that the ordinance without the department involvement or anyone here from the cell tower working group to provide information and answer questions is a bit premature. The department would like to see a more informative and procedural process followed. This would entail the cell tower working group or staff coming into a P&Z work session to discuss the ordinance. This should include capturing the questions, addressing the public testimony concerns we are going to hear tonight, identify the issues, a legal staff review, and a hearing decision on the ordinance. Thank you. I can answer any questions. It may be limited in nature regarding the changes. I can say that the March 14th hearing date is wide open with no cases. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Spring.
I don't have much to say. I appreciate the candor. I think that was my feeling that it's going to be very difficult to review this ordinance without, at least without some type of legal review or input. It's beyond my capability as a planner anyway to sort out the legal, whether or not it meets FCC requirements. I do want to thank you for the table that you provided regarding the changes in the draft and how it changes the existing code. I thought that was very useful. I didn't have to go through each step by step and figure out how it changed, and it was very clear to me that it was very useful. I want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. I'd also like to just, those of you that are here, I mean, we have a stack of laid on the table comments. I know my email was blowing up today from people other than who I do daily business with. And what I will say is, it's just so you know, first of all, when it's a case that's like a conditional use permit, we frankly ask that people don't reach out to us directly. There's an opportunity for public hearing. Legislative item is a little bit different, but I will say, to make sure that your messages get into the record, I really do request that you go to staff, and they can make sure that they get it as part of the formal record. Again, we do our best as volunteers, but oftentimes it's the emails that I get paid for that I have to respond to first, and then I come here as a volunteer. So we're going to do our best. I think what I'm hearing is we would like to get your help in identifying the issues that you have with this proposed amendment, whether you're for or against or have issue with for clarification. And we're going to do our best to identify those and go back to staff and ask for assistance with legal as well as others to just make sure that we have a good grasp on all of those issues. So with that, I don't see any other questions for staff at this time. I'd like to open the public hearing. Can I just ask, who intends to testify here this evening so we have a sense? Okay, very good. Remember, 5 minutes if you're a representative of a group, 3 minutes if you're an individual. And once we get going, if we could just keep the process going, you can at least the next person queue up behind the current speaker. So this pace is going to kill us all. Like, someone's got to come forward here, folks. Thank you. Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Hello, my name is Annette Cartier, ANNETTECARTIER. I'm a member of the Rogers Park Community Council. I'm part of the Citizens Working Group who drafted the suggested modifications to the ordinance in your packet tonight. In addition to Rogers Park, South Addition, Airport Heights, University, Turnagain, Northeast, and Mid-Hillside Community Councils all passed similar resolutions supporting the suggested modifications. As you listen to the public comments tonight, I ask that you seriously consider the view of the local residents and the communities represented. These are who will be impacted the most by your recommendations regarding the proposed ordinance. I'll just follow with a couple of my comments that are from the draft. On the 200% separation distance, I urge you to maintain the 200% separation distance. It has been adopted to protect our communities and is in place for the aesthetics and safety of the neighborhoods, including the schools and licensed child care centers. Keeping the 200% separation distance preserves the integrity of a neighborhood. Industry should not be allowed to waive or amend this critical part of the code for their competitive advantage at the expense of the residents of Anchorage and their property values, as well in our beautiful views of Anchorage. As a local government, you have the power to keep this separation distance in place. On technology is rapidly changing, and I ask that you explore the modern technology for our city of Anchorage that's available today that does not require construction of any more new cell towers. There is alternative technology out there that is less obtrusive than a cell tower. And I would suggest that the notice response time for the site applications and conditional use permits be extended to allow for at least 2 community council meetings to be held prior to the deadline for response, to allow for presentation, discussions within the community council, and general notice to the members of the community council. I would like to incorporate into the draft ordinance that notice of the application for a conditional use permit be sent to all community councils, not only the affected community councils members for the permit. that they're asking the conditional use permit for. Like this ordinance affecting all community councils, construction of a cell tower in one community affects all of Anchorage. It's in our landscape and our view shed. All residents of Anchorage should have the chance to respond to a conditional use permit. As residents of Anchorage, we are members of all community councils. Lastly, thank you for serving on the board tonight. We're all volunteers, just doing the best we can do, and I appreciate it. And finally, in your review and recommendations, I would ask that you consider the technology available that will have the least impact on the neighborhoods and beauty of Anchorage. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Spring, are you in the queue? You're not. I had a question. So, and I think we'd probably have many if we went through the either the staff proposed ordinance or the recommendation that you put forth. I mean, there's a lot there.
Yes.
Could you walk me through you proposed two new types of towers or non-towers, if you will.
Yes.
A Type 5 non-tower and a Type 6 existing building. I don't understand the difference between
the non-tower, so Type 5, that would be using small cell or an outdoor distributed antenna system, which is what I would say modern technology or alternative technology to a cell tower being constructed. And then Type 6, that would be something put on an existing facility, on an existing building, say on the side of the building, like that. And both of those, they're non-abrasive or they're not obstructive, so those would be, we suggested, through the administrative site plan approval.
I see. So you've added those. Every other tower type, including 4, becomes a full conditional use permit in any of the zoning districts that are provided, but those two would be through an administrative site plan because they're less obtrusive. That's your proposal?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And yes?
No, go ahead.
Are there any more questions?
I don't see any at the moment. Thank you for testimony.
All right.
Okay, this directly affects that question of 2105040K.
Can we get your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. Tim Feller, resident of South Addition. So first, I'd just like to say I attended many of the working draft meeting groups and really do advocate the adoption of this along with our suggestions and modifications from the citizens. But I just want to demonstrate something to you.
If you could speak into the mic, I know it's a little hard to do both, but we need to have you on the record.
Come around here, and we're going to show you what representation. This looks like. Hold that. If we were standing in a circle, and say we're in a circle, this would be a small cell tower. There could be as many as 20 of these, and they could be a lot larger. But by regulation, you know what they're called? An antenna.
Tim, I need you on the mic or it won't be part of the record.
So that was a demonstration of what a small cell tower array, panel array would be, and yet by regulation they're called an antenna. Yet, thank you. This piece of PVC pipe would be what most people think looks like an antenna. You might see it on a car, you might see it on a house, you might see it on a pole. This is what a DAS, or small cell antenna transmitter might look like. You wouldn't notice it. You'd put it up on top of a telephone pole, a utility pole, wherever. So I wanted to make this demonstration to say that in
Title 21, 05040K, 2 under definitions, F and G are what we're proposing, that we do at least define antennas so we don't say, oh, we're going to put an antenna up. And so we know what we're talking about when we say we want a conditional use permit or an administrative site plan, that we actually define the antennas. I'm not suggesting regulation. I don't think you'll find the citizens group does suggest regulation, but let's at least define it. And we should think about this because if you look up there, that might be an antenna of the future. Are we going to say that's the same as this? So I really do urge the planning and zoning. One, I do think that the working draft represents a really good dramatic development because let's remember, there were no cell phones when much of this was drafted. And so that's why with the original old code, there were no cell phones. When the new code came up, they were just starting to appear. So we need that definition and to protect our neighborhoods. And I hope you'll definitely consider adopting the working group's work as well as consider the citizens group's modifications. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you, Tim. I don't see questions. I think I don't know if I'm ready for a question yet, or there's a lot that you've proposed. For example, the equipment preference, showing preference to underground equipment. I mean, there's some things that on the surface, while I can recognize are preferable. We'd all rather not see anything, right? I'd rather not look anywhere and see an electrical box and everything else that I see cluttering up sidewalks and so forth. But there's a practical reality to the development side. Without putting you on the spot, and it's okay if you don't answer it, but are there some of these provisions that you feel more strongly about than others? I mean, are there ones that really rise to the top? Or do you just want to stand by and say this is they're all sort of equal in our minds?
No, for me, I can specifically say we don't want cell towers with that sort of panel array in residential areas. We don't mind them in commercial areas or industrial areas, which is most of Anchorage, but there is no excuse and no reasonable purpose for them to be in residential areas. They can be serviced. We already have a good fiber optic network within the city that can be adapted to use small cell technology and DAS systems. And that is what the rest of the world is using. That is what the rest of the United States is starting to use. Why should we adapt a backward, less efficient, obnoxious technology? We should regulate that. That's what planning and zoning does. That's what I'm hoping you will do. Thanks.
Thank you. Next person wishing to testify, and it's okay if you don't have props.
Hi, I'm Jean Ward, Jeanward, and I'm a member of the Rogers Park community and the Community Council, and I'm here speaking before you to encourage you to adopt most, if not all, of the proposed clarifications and refinements to Title 21 that were suggested by the Citizens Working Group, of which I'm also a member. I particularly am wanting to speak to the certified information section, and that it would say some of the language that we used is that there would be the signal data and cost analysis should be verified by an independent third-party engineering review by a consultant that is an Alaskan licensed professional engineer directly under contract with the municipality of Anchorage, and that this is to be complied with for both administrative site plan approval and conditional use permits, and the cost of the review would be covered by the application fee. The reason I think this language in Title 21 should be clear is it would make the process transparent and forthright when we collect, evaluate, and data is shared. Residents, as well as you and the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, would have access to clearly worded data and not be coerced into taking a telecommunication company's word for it when making decisions. We were informed at a Rogers Park Community Council that the need for the big tower was because there was noise from other interfering towers in our neighborhood, and then we found out that that same company were the owners of the towers that were making noise. So we're just looking for clarification on who's going to do this study, have an independent study done so that we can have an unbiased opinion. Also, the other factor in determining the proposed changes to Title 21 that I wanted to speak to was about residential view sheds. I would, just like Annette, would like to see the minimum separation distance remain at 200% and not be reduced to the 150%. I would like the pole size to be no taller than it's currently stated at 65 feet in residential areas. But most of all, I would like to be able to look up and marvel at the ravens flying, or a clear, crisp moon on a winter sky night, or the beauty of our wondrous mountains without having to first choose carefully what direction I'm facing to avoid the sightline interference of a tall cell tower when there are other options out there. Thank you for listening. Thank you for consideration of the issues.
Thank you. I do not see any questions, but thanks.
Thanks.
Next up, please.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Galen, Jonathan, and I don't live in Rogers Park. I live in Turnagain. I'm involved with the Turnagain Community Council, but I'm here as an individual. I became aware of this amendment and the changes recently in our most recent meeting in Turnagain, and I became concerned because this is new for me, and the idea that there is new technology that will work and is effective and is cost effective versus a giant 90-foot cell tower that could be put anywhere in someone's backyard and is happening in Anchorage and residential areas. So I was asked to read a statement, if I may, by a technical person, a fellow that's from California, a gentleman by the name of Ken Bernard. He's a partner with HetNet Wireless. He's a licensed certified RF FCC technician. He's a partner in HetNet Wireless, was in the U.S. Navy Aviation Electronics School, and basically this is a firm in California, throughout California, that designs these smaller systems, smaller form factor as they're called. I talked to him on the phone earlier today. He said these systems were cost compatible as compared to a 90-foot tower with the array that the gentleman just illustrated. Distributed antenna systems is what DAS represents. So let me read you what Mr. Bernard sent me, and to on behalf of the Rogers Park Community Council and Turnagain and all of Anchorage residents.
You got a minute, so just...
The need to maintain good wireless communication is important, essential to most people every day, and the traditional use of landlines are being replaced by mobile cellular services every day. To maintain this connectivity, we need to place more transmitter sites to serve mobile subscribers as a necessity. Distributed antenna systems has been used for many years to deliver wireless services to areas that need existing networks. DAS networks combine the number of small, low-level elevation antennas and nodes with fiber optic connection to hub facilities. These systems look very similar to cable television systems by design. Being a smaller form factor, less obtrusive, these compact systems are designed to discreetly blend into the outdoor locales for which they are deployed. These networks are ideal for communities with zoning requirements designed to maintain a certain aesthetic environment, or for areas where traditional towers are not feasible.
Thank you, sir, for your testimony.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
And I have a copy for everyone.
I do have one question for you, Mr. Sporhase.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jonathan, how much longer is your letter? I'd like to hear what the gentleman in California has to say.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
How much longer is the letter that you received? Another minute?
I believe he said he was going to pass it out to us.
Yeah, that just a sentence or two.
Do you have a question?
Well, I was hoping to get to the end of the letter where it stated kind of what the man's recommendations were, what I would imagine would be in that letter. Is that correct, Jonathan?
Well, he was basically, as I see it, he's explaining this concept of small node systems. They're viable as compared to, and as equal as compared to very large cell towers and system arrays.
And I was anticipating that that's what they're doing in California. Is that correct?
Well, they're doing it everywhere in California and
other markets.
No, you bet, all over the country. And this is new to me, but after spending about 2 days industriously through the internet, as the previous gentleman testified, and as a citizen, I don't see any reason why we should be using old, archaic, huge technology when this exists, and based on what this gentleman said, the cost is pretty much comparable.
Okay.
So that's a big factor because I have 2 cell phones. I want good cell service, but I don't think we need to have towers
Outdated
sprouting
technology.
up everywhere. And there's a safety issue as well, in my mind.
Well, thank you. That was the clarity that I was looking for.
Thank you for your consideration.
Anyone else wishing to testify, please come forward.
This is the first for me, so my name's Penny Panlener. I live in Rogers Park, 7 doors down from where this monstrosity has been threatened.
Can I get you to spell your last name, please?
Panlener.
Thank you.
It's honestly the first time in 26 years that I've lived in my home that I have actually thought, where would I move? This could drive me out of my neighborhood. And it affects me personally, but even if I saw them come up in other neighborhoods, I would be, it's outrageous. Anyway, I'm a visual artist, and I have can I leave you a flyer I made? And, you know, we all depend on our cell phones, but and my daughter has complained that she can't get service in our bomb shelter basement, and I want to go, oh, poor dear. But apparently there have been very few complaints from our neighborhood about service, so I don't think it's about us or being selected as the 1 gigabyte neighborhood. I think that was a marketing ruse to make us think we're getting something we somehow need. And I don't believe this is a need for us personally in our neighborhood. I think it's convenient for GCI to rise above the noise of all the other towers and just be a central location for receiving and selling more data back to us. So I think it's not necessary. That's all I have.
Thank you for your testimony.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my name is Lance Powell, and I'm a retired electrical engineer. I'm also representing Mid-Hillside Community Council, so that should hopefully give me the 5 minutes. Mid-Hillside Community Council. This is a Roger Parks issue, so why am I here? Some issues, and they're getting to be more and more of them, are citywide, and this is one of them, the location and the type of tower that is in, because what happens today in Rogers Park could very well happen in other community council areas. And there's nothing in the bylaws of the community council that say you have to stick exactly to your boundaries and not go outside them. So this is an issue I think the entire population of Anchorage needs to be involved with. It's important, and it's already been mentioned, it's important that you know that 7 community councils have voted that this ordinance is very important, and the amendments that the Citizens Council have worked on, the Citizens Group, be looked at and acknowledged. And I'm not sure of the process here, but it seems like I'm told that none of our suggestions were in the final modification that was sent to you, or the final ordinance amendments. So I would, I agree with staff that a little bit more time needs to be spent on this. It was a little bit premature to send it your way, and there are reasons for that, but I think the fact is it was premature to send it to you. Cell phones, they're a part of our life every day. You go somewhere, you can't help but see someone on a cell phone. I mean, it's part of our fabric. It's part of our life. But that doesn't mean that we have to accept what the cell phone company providers want to give us as far as antennas. We don't. Anchorage has a beautiful setting. In fact, I think you'd be hard put to say any other city can acknowledge that they have a setting as beautiful, as the way I call it, that Anchorage has. We're in the middle of in fantastic area. And so why destroy this great view with allowing cell phone towers, antennas, to be installed wherever and whatever equipment the cell phone providers say we're going to get? Why allow them just to do what they want? Time and time again, they will always choose the least costly. And that's what they should do, because they have shareholders that the companies are responsible to. However, the citizens of Anchorage want more than a low bottom line. They want a view shed in their residential areas that's not polluted with tall and ugly cell phone antennas. To this point, the providers have worked, pretty well with the citizens in Anchorage areas, because that's been their choice. They've done it. And why have they done it? I don't know. I mean, you could say they don't want to make future customers really, really mad. I don't know. I mean, that's their position. But we need to make the new modified Title 21 require the cell phone providers to use new technology that's used not only in the lower 48, but it's used all over the world. I came back from a trip in September from the continent of Europe, and I didn't see one cell phone monopole tower. I mean, I've seen it, industrial areas, we're already getting towers that are galvanized structures and industrial looking, and that's fine. But in residential areas, I think that's really not appropriate. We want to provide residential areas with a view that is not cluttered with a lot of cell phone antennas. The installation and location of towers to satisfy the local residential needs is already being used in the lower 48 and the world. By the way, a quick Google search of financial statements shows AT&T last year had a net income of $6.2 billion. Verizon had a net income of $17.8 billion. GCI had a net income of almost $1 billion. I only mention these things to show you that, they have the financial resources to do what is needed if we require it, if we ask for it. But time and time again, and I've seen it, once again, Anchorage, we'll give Anchorage whatever we don't want. We'll send it up to them, because they're really not part of the U.S. They're just kind of out there on their own. And I think we've all experienced that. Well, we are part of the U.S., and we're part of the states, and I think even more, we have such beautiful surroundings that we deserve to have the newest technology and the least pollution of our view shed in residential areas. House prices, no definitive studies have been done, but I think, I don't know if you want to call it intuition. That means what?
It means you're done, if you can just wrap up your final thought. And I do have one question for you in the queue, but please just wrap up.
Okay. But I think intuition would say, or as attorneys might say, a prudent man, if you had two houses exactly alike, except one house had a cell phone antenna near it and the other one didn't, which one would you choose? You would probably choose the one that did not have the cell phone tower for a lot of different reasons.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. I do have a question for you. Mr.
Sure.
Spring.
Yes. I've heard a number of people say that they don't want cell towers in residential areas. And this might be something maybe staff could help me with. It looks like from what we received that the changes are going to eliminate cell phone towers, at least type 1 towers, which are currently allowed under site plan review in R1 through R3. And they're going to eliminate that. So this ordinance goes a long ways towards getting rid of cell towers in the residential districts. Now, on the other hand, hillside, which is large lot zoning, they aren't eliminating the cell towers in those areas. It's already currently allowed as a site plan review, but there's no requirement or no proposal to eliminate that.
Yes, and I'm not saying that some of the changes that were suggested are not good. There are some good changes in there, but the changes that our volunteer group of citizens who got together, we weren't paid. We're like you. We weren't paid. We had no access to legal counsel. We came up with other suggested modifications that the new Title 21, we believe, needs. And we at least would like to some acknowledgement that the changes we have proposed have been looked at.
So you would probably propose to eliminate cell towers altogether in the residential districts in the hillside?
Well, what I'm saying is, well, what's a cell phone tower? I mean, if you define it as a tall monolith, just an example, in Rogers Park, the utility poles, 65 feet in height, 65 feet in height. All of a sudden, there's one that goes up to 90 feet, and that's the one that has the antenna on it. And so GCI, who's putting it in, seems to think, what's wrong with that? Well, there's a lot wrong with it. So I think, and we're not disputing the fact that a lot of these cell phone towers have been put in industrial zoned areas. That's almost a given because they're here and we're not going to be able to get rid of them. But I think residential areas deserve a special attention.
Thanks. And John, just for, the citizens ordinance changes the table to say not permitted for type 1, 2, and 3 towers in those residential zoning districts. So that's the proposal.
In the large lot zone?
Just all R1 to 3, 4 to 10, RO, and PLI.
Can I ask clarification from staff? I know staff hasn't been involved in it, but I think I'm a little confused on, you have a, what page is it, 23? Page 24, the Exhibit A, I believe, shows the changes to the requirements in each zoning district, right?
That's correct.
So it shows that type 1 towers, looks like you eliminate the requirement, you eliminate cell towers altogether from R1 through R3, correct? Previously, it was a site plan review, and I see the parentheses around it, seems to indicate that that's going to be eliminated, and they won't be allowed that type of tower in that zoning district. But then I see in the table that on 23 it says, proposed draft 1118, no type 1, 2, 3 in R1 through R3, which makes sense. Okay, so that's consistent with this table. So you're basically eliminating type 1 from those zoning districts altogether.
That is correct.
Okay, so thanks for the clarification. I just wanted to know that. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Pallett.
Thank you all, and please take our suggestions into consideration. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. And I'll comment on the process that, as I see it, I think that this ordinance was put out for to receive public input and have this process happen here. So I think one of the things that we weren't comfortable with is simply not going through some of the more significant issues and vetting them individually, and that's what we're suggesting is likely to happen after this meeting. So I think what you're asking for is that we consider things. I think we would like to consider the pros and cons for those types of suggestions before we make a final recommendation.
Can I say something?
Please.
Yeah, with all due consideration to the P&Z Commission, some of the questions that I have received means to me anyway that you guys haven't had a chance to review the comments that we've submitted. And that's frustrating because, again, like I said, we're all volunteers. Golly, we have jobs. We're like you guys. So that's at the very least we're asking is that consider our comments and suggestions.
No, and I believe we will, and that's why I think you're getting a pretty clear indication that we're likely not going to make a recommendation here this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Thank you for your time tonight. My name is Becky Wint Pearson. It's WINDT-PEARSON, and I'm appearing tonight as Land Use Counsel for GCI. We submitted written comments into the record last week, and I'm here to speak to those comments tonight and answer any questions I can help with at this point in the process. We at GCI understand this is a challenging issue. Wireless infrastructure is the classic planning dilemma. Everyone wants the service that is provided, but no one welcomes the infrastructure that's required in order to provide the technology. You've received a lot of commentary regarding small cell technology, and we addressed that issue in our letter. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the comments disregard some of the technical limitations that this technology faces in implementation in Alaska, and also some of the realistic impacts that these type of installations still do have on communities, which include potentially multiple antennas, potentially multiple antenna structures, also multiple base stations, and the backhaul facilities required to hook these facilities into the macro network. The long and short of it is there's really just simply no way to provide wireless service without putting wireless infrastructure of some sort in someone's backyard. From the beginning of the process, GCI has advocated for an updated ordinance which is reliable and predictable, applies objective standards, effectively incentivizes desirable outcomes, is appropriate for the Alaska environment, and is consistent with federal law. And we remain concerned about the same issues at this point. As we point out in our letter, the small cell provisions of the proposed ordinance we think require some significant work. Rather than encouraging this type of installation, the current height, camouflage, and mounting requirements are sufficiently complex, contradictory, and misaligned with FCC regulations, the National Electrical Code, and the remainder of Title 21 to basically effectively prohibit small cell installations rather than encouraging them in our neighborhoods. As highlighted in MLMP in their agency comments, neither the small cell language nor the provisions of the draft ordinance, which address extensions to existing power pole structures, will work as drafted for our local utilities. The language addressing power pole extensions is inconsistent with the treatment of antennas installed on existing structures elsewhere in the code and will create problems for both providers and for local utilities. The qualification process for a Type 4 tower or camouflage tower allows for only very limited camouflage options and also makes the process for approval of this type of tower actually lengthier and more complex and more costly for a provider as compared with a traditional monopole. So taken together, these provisions effectively disincentivize the construction of small cell installations, power pole extensions, and camouflage towers, all of which we in the industry understand to be more desirable outcomes for neighborhoods than a traditional monopole structure. We also have other concerns that we've put out in our letter. The revised ordinance removes the existing height incentive for co-location that's in the current code, which I think will effectively disincentivize providers to build towers which are realistically tall enough for use by more than one provider and encourage the construction of more shorter towers. The fall zone requirement in the ordinance remains at 150% of tower height, which in basic physics tells us a tower can't actually fall. And so we do have a concern, we have a legal concern about that as a proxy for an RF radiation concern, and also just a concern about the tenability of that construction limitation. Inconsistencies between the ordinance and the remainder of Title 21, I think, create procedural changes that will be without any rationale or different procedural paths for applications for wireless technology other than the existing paths for other types of applications, seemingly without reason. And on the flip side, the ordinance removes any kind of variance process other than the standard variance process, which I think will be at odds with federal law. Generally speaking, I concur with a lot of the presenters that have come before me that I think this is a good start, this ordinance, but I also agree with the staff's recommendation that I think further consideration of a number of issues, including the specific ones that we've pinpointed, and potential revision of the ordinance language will make it actually a workable solution for all parties involved.
Thank you, Becky. John, you got a question? Oh, sorry. I had Mr. Walker, and then I got a question.
Rebecca, can you explain, so I think you just mentioned it in your comments, this using the fall zone as a proxy for a radius for the radio waves or whatever. So that's illegal, or that's against FCC?
Yeah, under the Telecommunications Act of 1996, local zoning authorities are prohibited from legislating or from denying an application specifically for a tower project on the basis of RF frequency, RF and RF radiation concerns, as long as the tower complies with FCC regulation. Basically, that area of regulation has been preempted by the federal government. So recourse for those concerns is to the FCC, and cannot be to a local zoning commission.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess I think I understand why the tower fall zones exceed the actual height of the tower. I mean, stuff can fall off of it. It's really like a giant third-class lever. I mean, so I don't know how, unless we get the Mythbusters to go chop a tower down and show us what it looks like. I don't know that we really have a good analog for what that looks like. But is there a concern by the industry that that's what's happening here?
Well, it has been informally discussed in the process as that being a proxy, and my understanding is that when it was initially adopted, that it was kind of a proxy of a rule of thumb for people who had concerns about RF radiation, and you can't actually put that in an ordinance, and so we had a 200% fall zone. It's not actually called a fall zone; it's called a separation distance that has been in the interim referred to as a fall zone, but which was adopted initially in part because of a concern about exposure to RF radiation.
I see. No, thanks for clarifying on that.
So have you had a chance to look at other community ordinances, and if in so doing, I mean, as this process was begun, I think we struggle here at this body to deal with these decisions when they come before us. So there was a desire to relook at the ordinance, and the municipality and others made their best guess. But one of the objectives was to try to, in fact, incentivize stealth towers and smaller applications. What have other communities done to truly, in your opinion, from the industry standpoint, truly incentivize that type of technology?
Well, I think the chief way that it can be done and is done is by making the permitting process easier, quicker, and less expensive for a wireless provider to have a tower of that sort approved. I know one change has been suggested by, and I think will be addressed by colleagues that are representing AT&T, which would be to to allow the director to make the decision about qualification of a Type 4 tower, or we could potentially roll that into the application. And I think at this point, at least the one Type 4 tower we've constructed, we came before this commission for a full conditional use permit process, then we had to get back on the agenda and come back for a whole second review of the design, and it required, I think, a second fee and a second filing and several more months of waiting. And I think that realistically, if you're interested in encouraging that type of technology, making a permitting structure like that's the reverse incentive. It's harder to get something permitted that is potentially less obtrusive. So it should be revised to make the process easier.
I agree with that. The citizens group has, in their proposal, you heard me ask the question previously, kind of defined, they created a Type 5 and Type 6 application, one on a building, one on an existing structure. Is that type of clarification useful? And I think where they're going with that is to try to say there is a different process. Now, whether it's as easy, streamlined as you would like to see, that's up to your opinion. But is that something that's worthwhile?
I think that the incorporation of those different classifications could be useful. I mean, one of my chief concerns about the way small cells are addressed in this ordinance is, first of all, the requirements are tremendously convoluted and contradictory, but there's also no sort of route for if you don't fit those complex and convoluted requirements, where do you go to apply? What are you then if you're proposing a small cell solution? And I do think that it would be useful to have a category in the ordinance that addresses small cell technology as a whole and where it's permitted in general. And then again, it's a different question whether or not we can create a reasonable list of requirements for what constitutes a small cell solution. But I don't have any objection to creating a category that is a small cell, and then a category which potentially is an installation on a building. We do a lot of antenna installations on the top of buildings. To my knowledge, I don't know if we have anything on the side of a building yet, but many things on the tops of buildings.
And I think, I know you're not the technical expert on the topic, but I'm sure you're more expert than I am. This idea, can we legitimately serve our needs with small cell technology?
So from my understanding, from my discussions with my technical people, I would say we can in certain instances, or we can try to. No provider has yet to install outdoor small cell technology in Alaska, in large part because we live in a community that doesn't lend itself well to this kind of technology. We aren't a dense urban location with a lot of closely set homes and tall buildings where it makes sense to hang these kinds of cells. So there are certain neighborhoods in our city where we could try. There are where homes are closer together, where there is the kind of residential density where it makes sense, where we don't have major topographic or foliage restrictions that would make the kind of technology an untenable solution. But as a blanket solution across the board for instance, for every residential neighborhood, including the whole hillside, my understanding is that we couldn't actually. And there is some cost concern there. I mean, I think that if we hung a small cell on in front of every single home on the hillside, we could potentially create a network that would exclusively with small cells, which would, address coverage needs. But that at that level, it becomes financially untenable.
Thank you. I have a question from Mr. Walker.
Can you talk about this instance where you guys came in for a permit for a concealed or a camouflage tower and then had to come back? Because the one I'm recalling, and I certainly...
Girdwood tree, right? It's a tree in Girdwood, isn't it?
No, it's Verizon's. It's the Chugiak Tower. And admittedly, that one we came in with a monopole proposal, which was then turned into a Type 4 tower. But even, Verizon went through the comparable process when they proposed that tower in Girdwood. They also came back for a second qualification rehearing on that tower.
Right. So the one you're talking about, I think, is the last time we saw you here, if I'm not mistaken, was the one that was on the hillside there in
It's in Chugiak.
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah, not the hillside, but so now I think it was approved when the first time it came back camouflaged. Am I incorrect about that, or I just want to make sure?
You're correct. It was approved, and we're in the process of constructing it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I was remembering that correctly, and I agree. I think you guys need a tenable permitting process to go through so that you're not wondering what's going to be around the next corner. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
No problem.
My name is David McCargo, MCCARGO, and I am Rogers Park resident. I apologize not having a whole lot of erudite things to add what's already been discussed, because I just found out about this proposal this morning, even though it's been kicking around for a long time. To start with, I think the earlier implication or suggestion that there is a lot of information that has been submitted to staff that hasn't been digested implies that this should go back to the Assembly Working Group. There's a lot of stuff to be teased out here, much of which I've heard about tonight. When I started to look at this today, briefly, of course, I went to the internet, and the first place I generally go is Wikipedia. And you'll get at least 8 to 10 hits on Wikipedia if you just type in cell phone towers. And I think one of the things that the panel here, and certainly the planning staff and the Assembly has to look at, is the entire package of what constitutes cell phone towers, coverage, and the technology. Because this stuff, if you look at it in its broadest configuration, all meshed together. And there are all these different competing technologies. You've got different providers. As has been pointed out, the technology is changing dramatically. Alcatel, for example, according to one site, has developed a device that's almost about the size of my hand. And as the previous speaker from GSI implied, is that, okay, it can work in some places, it can't work in other places. It may work downtown, but it may not work out, let's say, up in Hillside. And so if you're looking at a network of cell phone devices, towers, whatever you want to term them, that they have to be looked at in the packages that they would expand, let's say, the Anchorage Bowl, or throughout the boundaries of the municipality. Personally, my biggest objection to cell phone towers, as has been pointed out, is aesthetics. I really don't want to be looking at a forest of these things. From where I live, which is a residential area, because of the mixed zoning in Anchorage, I'm looking from a residential area, but I look across the city, across commercial districts. And from about where I live, I can see 3 of these cell phone towers from just where I live. And, you know, the last thing I wanted to see is these things proliferate. Sort of as a parallel example, and I've been a big critic of it, when ML&P came through and put up, did the Midtown upgrades, look at the ugliness that came out of that. And finally, I'll wind up with this. And once again, you know, going to a site like Wikipedia, you can see for yourself. But there are a lot of potential health issues that are associated with cell phone towers. And so finally, I'll just wind up by saying that you need to look at the larger picture, not just where these things are going to go, say in a residential neighborhood, in a commercial neighborhood, but you need to look at the entire big picture. And so my recommendation is that this goes back to the working group. Thank you, unless there's some questions.
Thank you for your testimony.
Hi, good evening. Sorry, I have a cold. My name is Marilyn Pillafont. It's spelled P as in Paul, I-L-L-I, F as in Frank, A-N-T. I am a 50-year Alaskan resident, and I'm a 16-year resident of Rogers Park. And I am part of the Rogers Park Community Council. And I'm here to ask this commission to take into account the neighborhood perspective and to rethink the proposed cell tower in Anchorage neighborhoods. I think aside from the aesthetic obliteration of a homeowner's view being impacted by erection of such tall towers, I'd like to point out that our community council has offered on more than one occasion to work with GCI to find a common ground with regard to placing additional cell coverage in a neighborhood by use of small cell technologies. GCI seems to be unwilling to compromise on the type of cell power to be installed to improve their customer base and bottom line. Last September, our community council submitted several questions of inquiry to GCI regarding their plan, and yet when they came for a follow-up presentation this last January, they admittedly stated that they were moving forward with their original plan, their design plan, and hadn't really considered alternatives. In addition, GCI was fairly non-responsive to our original inquiries. And then subsequent to the January presentation, if you would call it that, GCI had been sent additional inquiries and questions, and just learned today that our president just received some responses to those questions, but several of them did not have a response. That it was still in process. Our community council is very willing to work with businesses and entities, enterprises within our community. Our work with solid waste services to deal with the alley garbage pickup issue is an example of how successful collaboration and cooperation can happen with dealing with these neighborhoods. I guess my main thing is here tonight that I think that mostly people are looking for land use and development in neighborhoods that meets a quality of life, social, environmental, and physical needs of its present residents. And then secondly, that we know good planning makes for a livable neighborhood, a safe and healthy community. And I would like to believe that the Planning and Zoning Commission statement, which those are the words in your mission statement, I hope that they are accurate and honest in its presentation. Please, I'm glad to know that this isn't a done deal yet here tonight, and that more and further research and education is going to happen before a decision is made. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Show of hands, who else is planning to testify? Great, thanks.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Iris Matthews, and I'm the president of the Rogers Park Community Council, so here representing the Community Council. As you've heard, our council has taken a very, very active interest in the proposed revisions to Title 21 around cell phone towers and other telecommunications facilities. This is because as a community, we have found ourselves in direct opposition to proposed plans to build a large cell phone tower on more than one occasion. We do have a current issue in our neighborhood, but we have had others in the past. I expect this will continue to happen, although my hope for our community and the others throughout Anchorage facing similar challenges is that we can find a reasonable compromise. We don't want to prohibit the building of all cell phone towers in and around our neighborhoods, but we want to ensure that the character and the amenities in our neighborhoods are not compromised either. Further, we should ensure that the neighborhoods affected by commercial activities such as the building of cell phone towers have the opportunity to comment and add their community's needs and desires to ordinances such as this. The Rogers Park Community Council has passed a resolution with suggested changes, which you have. It is our belief that the regulation, as currently proposed, does not adequately address the concerns of the residents of Anchorage neighborhoods where these towers are currently being built and will continue to be built in the future. We think it is very important that additional modifications be made to these regulations before they are sent to the Assembly for further action, and we're glad to hear that you seem to be feeling that way as a body right now. Our own experience has been that builders of cell phone towers, whether they are local companies or third-party vendors, have very little interest in their community's concerns, and they attempt to bypass them at every conceivable juncture. For them, the decisions are business. We understand that, but in Rogers Park, we take these things personally. We live there. We have other interests, and we want to be sure that impacts to the community are also a part of the planning process. The best way to do this is to make sure that the regulations governing how these towers can be built are clear, and that the concerns of the citizens, particularly those who have already felt the impacts of tower building activities, and can speak to those in real terms and not just in hypotheticals, those need to be considered too, just as much as the business interests. I don't want to go over each of the proposed changes in the regulations. I think you've heard a lot about those, and you know that those are just a guide. Those are things that people who've come together feel very strongly about. But I wanted to just talk a little bit more about kind of those intentions and what we were thinking of as the community council and the discussions we've had over the last few months and the discussions that we had a couple years ago when we were faced with the different large cell phone tower being built adjacent to people's homes. We think these towers that are proposed in any type of residential area need to get a conditional use permit. We want to know what those towers are, whether they're right in the area or right adjacent to it. That permitting process ensures that residents who live nearby those towers get notice, that community councils get notice, that we have an opportunity to comment on them, and that may facilitate a process where we can work collaboratively to minimize the impacts to the neighborhood with those who want to build the towers. Without that, we find it doubtful that any tower builder would ever come to our community council and ever want to tell us even about their plans. It would be much quicker to just build the tower. We want to make sure that anytime there are exemptions granted, for example, for the use of an existing pole or anything else, that the core pole, the height, the diameter, that those don't change, that the landscaping is still required. We think that protects residents and makes sure that that there is no wolf in sheep's clothing in those exemptions being granted, that we get the same thing. The tower doesn't get any bigger. The landscaping doesn't go away. The barriers that might have been there before should remain. We're really concerned about some of the notification requirements. Many councils don't require 30 days notice in the council before an issue can even be brought up. So if you want to have the council's opinion on a tower or any other proposed building project, you really need to allow more than 30 days for us to be able to properly notice people in our community and form a public opinion. It just takes time. I think, as you've really heard, we're really interested in using more of the best available technologies. We want to look forward to what is happening. We want to encourage people building towers to do co-location, to look at small scale technology, to think about the radio interference. It's our experience that tower builders don't provide this kind of information to the residents without being forced to, that they're not interested in doing that extra bit of work. And that they don't really have any incentive or reason to explore other alternatives under the current code. They want to come in, they want to build the towers, they want it to be the quickest and best way possible. We understand that from a business perspective, but we have a different one, and we want to make sure that this ordinance allows for that. I'll finish up by saying I sat here and listened to Ms. Pearson give the example about the overly burdensome permitting process that they had to go through in one particular example. But then she mentioned that that process was in Chugiak, which a couple months ago I heard her describe as a shining example of how willing they were as an agency or as a business to work with a local council when their original proposal didn't meet the council's needs. And so to us, I guess what I would say is that the process worked in that example. It did not allow for them just to speed through and get their permit as quickly as possible. In fact, because what they wanted was not what the community wanted, they were forced to go back and find a more workable solution with the community. And now the community is happy and GCI is happy and their permit has been approved. And it did take just a little bit longer, but I think everyone was better for having had that process. And so I wouldn't call it overwrought or overly burdensome. And I hope that the ordinance as passed will encourage that type of collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Any questions?
No questions, thank you. So a reminder, when you see the middle light go off, you have a minute remaining. And Lori here has told me never let the first person go over because then everybody goes over. So that's where we find ourselves here this evening. So, but please wrap up when you start seeing that middle light. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bonnie Hepburn, Bonnie Hepburn. I live in South Addition. My main reason for being here is to address the concern about what's happening in the neighborhoods. The small cell technology I'm greatly in favor of. The GCI representative mentioned that it's not feasible or the best choice for all of our neighborhoods. I say that if you add something like that into the plan, that you have the determination be made by an independent consultant, not by the provider or by any communications company that would benefit from that. I'd also like to make a comment on the camouflage towers. I have traveled extensively in the lower 48. Many people collect states. I collect counties. So I'm not on the interstates very much. I have seen a lot of these camouflaged or stealth towers. When I first started to see them, I didn't know what I was looking at because I wasn't familiar with cell phone technology. This was a number of years ago. And so I would see these trees that just didn't look like trees. And I would see a cross in front, a very huge cross in front of a small church, or a really fat flagpole with a tiny flag on it. And it wasn't until later that I realized what I was looking at. So when you're addressing that type of technology, my comment is there was one place where I didn't realize what I was seeing, but it was inspirational. And that was actually this last spring, after I knew more about these things. I was headed down the Pony Express Highway in Kansas, and I saw a cutout of a Pony Express rider. And then a few hours later, I saw another one. And I was actually inspired by this, inspired enough to stop in the museum and check out what, the history of the Pony Express. Well, later on, I realized that those were probably camouflaging cell phone because they were on hillsides, they were up high. So I propose that if they need to put any on the Seward Highway, they do a doll sheep at Windy Corner on the cliff would be awesome. So everyone can say they saw a doll sheep when they drive by. So I guess my comment is that don't say something like they should not look man-made, because that's subjective. I think they should look inspirational. And my closing comment is not to do with that, but just to comment on billboards, the idea that Alaska is one of only 4 states that has banned billboards. So we don't have that blight in our state. Let Anchorage set the example for the cell tower technology in Alaska by looking at aesthetics rather than just getting the technology up there. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Thank you. Good story, too.
Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, my name is Kathy Gleason, Cathygleason. I'm a longtime Turnagain resident, longtime Turnagain Community Council member, former president. I was part of the Citizens Working Group that has been referenced by others who have testified. I'm also currently serving as vice president, but only part of my comments will reflect council comments. I just passed around a resolution that I know is very difficult to read. I'm not sure what happened. Our resolution that we passed January 7th was supposed to be sent to you and in your packet, but I didn't see it. So that's the really bad copy that I had. But it does mirror the exact wording as other councils' resolutions that have been passed. Definitely support the working group effort because we as you are recognizing now, sat in on Assembly Working Group and Assembly, what used to be called the Title 21 committee meetings, and it was clear to us that in the middle of all the marijuana stuff, they were also on a parallel track to really get this on a fast track, and we're not sure why. It never became clear to me as just a member and a resident sitting in on all of this discussion why this is being pushed so quickly with so little vetting and no collaboration with staff. I'm just shocked about that. We clearly need to turn back time on this. As past president, I was president from 2011 to 2013. Verizon proposed 2 cell towers for Turnagain, and they both are up. They're monopoles. The first in 2012, Verizon was just getting into the business of coming up here, and in fact, they had no requirement. I heard about it through neighbors. We weren't contacted as a council. It was in the summertime. And so I actually called the representative petitioner out of Washington. They flew up 4 representatives from Verizon just for our council meeting. It was pretty impressive. However, they had no intention of doing anything but what they were proposing, even though there was severe opposition by the neighborhood. And that even though we voted to oppose it, it went in. Second one is at the Lutheran Church there next to Dempsey. And neighbors were very concerned, but we didn't take an official position on that one. My point is, through that process, it was clear to me and to those involved with this that there needs to be some changes in code. I would say specifically with regard to notification that other people were referring to this evening, and if I could elaborate, I'd appreciate it.
Kathy, could you elaborate on the notification issue?
I certainly can, Commissioner Robinson. Thank you. First of all, as the working group and just being involved with notification about these notices in general, 500 feet is not enough. And back then it was 500 feet only to property owners. Most of the people around that first cell tower proposal by Verizon were renters. So most people didn't even know about that. I think that's been corrected, but I really think it should be 1,000 feet. Also, because there was not a conditional use requirement, there was no formal public process for a public hearing so we could come in front of your body and testify. When I was council president and word got out about it, I can't tell you how many calls and emails I got from residents saying, when can I go to a public hearing? When can I testify? And I said, you can't. There's nothing that requires it. So I want to echo a statement made by a previous person that I think all proposals for residentially zoned property should require a conditional use permit to allow that extra public participation, because these are in residentially zoned areas. They affect the neighbors. They affect our quality of life. And lastly, with regard to the appeal process. I learned a lot during those years as president and Verizon's proposals, because I had no idea that once an administrative person made a decision about whether to approve or oppose a proposal, just goes through an administrative site review, that code was written, this was old Title 21, I'm not sure what new says, but back then, code said you are to notify, the petitioner is supposed to notify everyone who received that initial public notice of the decision that was made, because residents are only given 15 days to appeal an administrative decision. But Turnagain didn't get any notice.
I'm going to be careful asking you a question again if you keep doing this now.
All right.
I have a question from Ms. Bailey.
You got my point, I think.
I think I got your point.
Thank you.
I have a specific question about notice. Another member from a different community council mentioned that they thought notice should go to all community councils. Is there something specific about cell phone antennas or cell phone towers that means that it should kind of change the way we're notifying people and that we should notify every single community council of what's going on? Do you think that goes too far? Do you think that's appropriate? And if it's appropriate, why?
Well, I thought it was interesting. I frankly have never thought about, I'm speaking for myself, not the council. I would have to give that some thought, but I'd say that it merits some consideration, because unlike so many other things that require an application and it has to go through a permitting process, they aren't typically 90 to 125 or 30 feet high where you see them all over town. And so I think that merits some consideration. I really do, because as was stated, we're all residents of this community. We all enjoy our view sheds, whether they're right in our backyard being affected or if we're driving to another neighborhood in the area. If we see these tall, kind of very in-your-face structures, and we are going to continue to see more and more, is this really the kind of city we want? And perhaps as a community we should be notified so we can all provide our input when this comes before you or it's an administrative decision. So thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your consideration.
Next.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. My name is Merity Pabst. It's P-A-B-S-T, and I'm here tonight on behalf of AT&T. Along with me is Sean Ushman, AT&T's new External Affairs Director for the state of Alaska. We thank you for the opportunity to speak. Excuse me, I'm trying to talk fast. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. We support staff's revised recommendation for next steps. We think that the municipality would benefit from another draft for your body to review and consider before taking action. As you've seen in your record, AT&T previously has provided detailed written comments. We did provide a letter to the committee, then a letter to the assembly that addressed several legal issues related to the proposal, and then finally a detailed letter and red line to your group about 10 days ago. We're happy to answer any questions you may have about our written comments or elaborate on any of our points. I did want to hit a couple high points, and I'll try not to repeat things that have already been mentioned tonight. Just to back up a little bit for context, something we started with when we were commenting to the committees is that carriers are responding to a skyrocketing increase in demand, particularly in residential areas. The CDC publishes statistics regularly. We provided some in the fall. They're updated just recently. Over 45% of homes nationwide are wireless only. The numbers are even higher for younger demographics, ages 25 to 34. It's more in the neighborhood of 70% of those homes are wireless only. So the demand is strong, and carriers need a viable option for reaching these folks. In general, we have, I would say, about 4 categories for our comments. We have concerns about conformity and consistency with federal law and other codes and regulations like those mentioned by the Municipal Light and Power. We think that some clarity to the use categories, maybe a consolidation of the use table, and some work to sort out some real incentives for the different types of uses would really help everyone understand the ordinance a little better. I think there's a lot of confusion about how particular proposals would be categorized still. We'd like to see a little more use of incentives in the code to incentivize the types of facilities that the municipality would like to see. That kind of ties in with one of our concerns about compliance with federal law.
Everyone else has had an opportunity to wrap. Please
I know,
take
you
it.
started it. In the first issue mentioned in our December letter, there's case authority concluding that strict preferences for types of technology are not permitted in local zoning codes. That's an area that's preempted by federal law. So while the strict preference that this code now has, where a proponent for a tower has to show that they could not serve the area through DAS, while that we are asking that it be deleted, consistent with federal law, the same sort of result can be reached through good use of incentives, exemptions for certain small cells in DAS, exemptions that will work to make the siting of the facility less expensive, take less time, and importantly, be a decision that's not subject to the exercise of discretion. Objective standards for review.
Thank you. I have a question from John Spring for you.
Yeah, I'm surprised that I haven't heard any objections to parts of the code, revisions that prohibit cell towers in residential areas, the R1 through R3. Is that going to be a problem for
we have proposed in our comments that cell towers still be permitted in residential zones as a conditional use, so that the table would provide in the most protected residential zones. The type 1 tower could still be a conditional use, and then it would be a site plan in the other residential zones. And so incentives could be used to place the type 4 tower being a site plan review. So incentives could be used to encourage the use of type 4 tower instead of the type 1 tower. So the type 1 tower would be conditional use, and the type 4 tower would be site plan review or permitted outright.
Any other questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else wishing to testify, please come down so that we're ready. Is this anyone else after this speaker wishing to testify? You last up? You might be.
Don't turn the faucet off.
Oh, wait.
They're out there. They're out there. They're just waiting. All right, my name is Heather Nolan. The last name is Knowlan. I'm a South Addition resident. Testified here about 2 years ago and still coming back because I'm enjoying the process. The first thing I'd like to say is I appreciate planning staff and P&Z understanding that this is a really complex issue and that it is quite premature to even look at the draft that was submitted from Dennis Wheeler and planning staff. I think we all agree, we know that there needs to be some sort of concessions, and there also needs to be an agreement of criteria. This is something that's been agreed upon since working group started. What I'm not seeing is a lot of input from anybody other than the community or the work group with ideas of how to actually kind of solidify these criteria. So as much as I don't mind hearing that may be contrary to federal law, I'd like to hear what actual solutions would be. Mr. Spring, I'm right there with you. What is a tower? What's the difference between a 1 tower or 2 tower, 3 tower, or 4 tower? That's one of the reasons why the working group suggested coming up with different types so that we could demonstrate that a tower itself is this huge pole, right, with this array on top. But What the small cell technology and DAS provides, like Mr. Feller showed earlier, is it's these little additions to existing utility poles or light poles and things like that. So that's why we need a lot more clarity of what is a tower versus antenna versus an array versus DAS. There's just a whole litany of things that need to be really well defined. That would be great. The second thing I wanted to say is, I don't recall ever, and I've read through Title 21 a few times, fall zone, it's not in there. It's not a term. It's a term that's being used by industry to convolute the conversation. It's a red herring, in my opinion. I've only heard one person say anything about any health issues. It's not the fall zone. It's the separation distance. It's our view sheds out of our homes. It's the property values of our homes. So again, fall zone. I challenge somebody to show me where it is in Title 21. I also sent a letter today which actually talks about different websites. Unfortunately, the first couple pages of my letter didn't make it in, but Qualcomm, you can Google Qualcomm small cells technology. There's Small Cell Americas, Small Cell Forum, all sorts of things, and they give a great depiction of what these macro towers do and how you can have these small antennas kind of fill in the gaps. And that's what I'd like to see, is those gaps filled in. All right.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
My name is Racheli Feller. The last name is spelled F as in Frank, E-L-L-E-R. And I have lived in Alaska for 32 years, and I live in South Addition for the past 26 years. My home is a historic South Addition neighborhood. It's where I choose to live and have my family. Your immediate surroundings, your home, your neighborhood, your family is the most important component of our quality of life. And this is all about quality of life. I attended the weekly working group for the rewriting of the cell tower initiative under Title 21 since past summer. I took unpaid time off from work so I can listen, understand this complicated issue, make comments and suggestions so that our neighborhood and our beautiful view shed can be preserved and protected. I must say that I've traveled extensively around the world. They've got small cell technology everywhere, in Europe, in Israel, in Australia, in Asia, and it might be slightly more expensive, but in the long run, it is comparable. I would like planning and zoning to do for us is to listen to our concern and suggestion, as well as make clear written distinction between the type of cell tower that are erected in neighborhood as opposed to the ones in industrial and commercial zone. We, the citizens of Anchorage, want to see a 200% separation distance between the telecommunication towers and our homes, or in special circumstances, no lower than 150%. Only thus small cell telecommunication devices should be used in our 1, 2, and 3 and 4 zone. Stealth or camouflage tower may be deployed in the residential area, providing they do not interfere on the minimum separation distance and has been approved by the CUP. Co-location should be encouraged for all tower in residential areas that have been approved. We want to preserve the integrity and beauty of our neighborhood, our school, our daycares, while ensuring better communication services through the use of more appropriate technology. Proper zoning enforcement and regulation can provide this by encouraging telecommunication companies to invest in superior technology. I encourage the Planning and Zoning Commission to adopt the draft of the Cell Tower Working Group, as well as incorporate the recommendation of the citizen community. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you. Howard, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I've handed out a letter that talks about one particular issue that has been discussed a little bit tonight, but seems to come up frequently when you talk about cell towers and telecommunication facilities. The Citizens Working Group, which I was a part of, has heard this idea that the Federal Communication Commission, FCC, has rules that do not allow local governments and utilities to have a say in the facilities that are constructed in the communities. So one of the members of our working group wrote a letter to the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Chairman Tom Wheeler, I don't believe any relation to Dennis Wheeler, and received a letter back in response to her questions. And that email is attached to the bottom of that email that I sent you. And basically, Chairman Wheeler says you cannot do three things. You cannot discriminate among cell service providers. You cannot say, we, the community, do not want any cell service. And it says that you cannot talk about the health concerns of cell towers and I forget the term, it's in the letter, that Chairman Wheeler said we aren't to talk about. So I forgot about it, and I'm not talking about it. The letter that he wrote back referenced two specific documents. One is called the Telecommunications Act of 1996. I got a copy of it. It's a big document. I went to the reference that he suggested, and I also went to the other document called Telecommunication Facilities Siting and Dispute Resolution. And I've given you a copy of the pertinent pages from both those documents. In both those documents, it says that the local community has authority through its land use regulations and zoning to determine what the community wants for telecommunication facilities.
Thank you. Could you, Howard, state your full name for the record, please?
Howard H. Levine, L-E-V-I-N-E.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for the documents. I see no further questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Jim Richardson, R-I-C-H-A-R-D-S-O-N. I'm a resident of Rogers Park. I'm a member of the Rogers Park Community Council. Most of what I would want to say has already been said, and I don't need to belabor that, but I did listen with interest to the discussion about requiring a conditional use permit for all applications in a residential neighborhood in Anchorage, and I fully support that. But I guess just thinking as a Planning and Zoning Commission, I've testified a lot on conditional use permits over the years, and I would urge you to make sure that the public really gets a chance to have their concerns dealt with. You've heard numerous failures of that, and you've probably seen those over the past several years. The College Village community was very opposed to the cell tower that was put in Don Jose's and rolled over their comments, and that was built. You heard of Verizon, the Turnagain Community Council, and a lot of residents opposed the Verizon tower. It was built. Right now, we're, as a Rogers Park, has a threat of having a cell tower that's a horrible cell tower 40 feet away from the nearest residential building rammed down our throat. And I haven't seen any indication that that company cares a whit about the concerns of the community. So we had a person that in the business say these are never built over the objections of the community, and that's not correct. So I would hope that in your process in setting up conditional use evaluation that you make sure that the concerns of the residents of Anchorage are considered and dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you. Just would like to note that as proposed and as currently allowed, towers are permitted uses in the B1A, B1B, B3 zoning districts, which is, I think, the example that you just cited at Don Jose. So you can have zoning districts that are commercial in nature that are adjacent to residential districts, and they're treated quite differently than if it was in the neighborhood. So I think that is a comment.
My name is Gary Solin, S-O-L-I-N, and I live in East Anchorage. I live near Scenic Park Elementary, which is part of the Scenic Foothills Community Council. I live 205 feet from a 100-foot permitted brown monopole, and the tower's been there for 6.5 years. The tower is on what's now currently Wayland Baptist University, their lot, 2.88 acres, and it's adjoining Arnold Muldoon Park. Their parking lot exit comes directly into my parking area. I've lived in that house since 1984 when we bought the house. It was vacant land. So it's 7 feet below my lot, and then it slopes up, paved area. There's a lot more to a cell tower than just a structure. The operation and maintenance is part of that, and that's where the separation, the 200% of the separation distance comes into effect. 3 times since this tower has been put in, they were doing maintenance. They do maintenance in the middle of the night because they don't want to interfere with, they don't want to bother their customers. They want to have the least amount of downtime. So their trucks were shining their lights up into our bedrooms. So keep that in mind. It's not a fall thing, it's a separation distance. And this was a conditional use permit. And so in that report, you know, the impacts are understated and the benefits are overstated as far as I'm concerned. And this tower, actually the actual permit that I saw from the planning staff sent to me said it was going to be a galvanized steel. Somehow it got changed to a painted brown. It doesn't blend in with anything. It's 100 foot tall. The birch trees are 40 foot in that area. It just sticks up above there. So I'm a very strong advocate of if they're just going to put a monopole up to keep them the galvanized steel. They had to go. The tower was built in an easement, and as part of that process was 2010-016. One of the members of the Board of Examiners and Appeals thought that tower was in a great spot because as they drove down Muldoon Road, they didn't see the tower, which to me is, that's poor planning. I have a brother-in-law that's a real estate agent, and I asked him, typically a real estate ad, you see view property, good schools. I asked him if he'd ever seen an ad that said next to a cell phone tower. He just laughed and said no. And then I had some other friends as real estate agents, and it was implied earlier that as people drive up to a house with a client, they see a cell phone tower and says, we're not even going to look at that. So there's more to just valuation in cell phone towers impacting residences. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Anyone else wishing to testify? Anyone at all? Going once, going twice. Gone. Shall we close the public hearing? At this point, I'm going to close the public hearing. What is the wish of the body? John.
I'm not prepared to make a motion right now, but I would like to I think, in my opinion, it seems like we need to have a work session. There's just too much to talk about. I mean, I can't even begin to list the issues that need to be raised. I mean, my only concern is, do we have the expertise now to really delve into this in a work session? We know that the municipal attorney Wheeler was the one who mostly wrote it. So if we have a work session, can we get the information we need?
And just to clarify, Wheeler wrote it after he was the municipal attorney. He had been hired by the Assembly. So there's a distinction of who he was representing when it was drafted.
Oh, so he could be available still, then?
Possibly. We can inquire.
Speak to it, then. That would be helpful. So I guess my opinion would be to, before we make a list of issues that we need to have the staff respond to, that maybe we just have we should have had the work session earlier, probably, before the meeting. But
agreed.
Since we didn't, maybe we should have one and set one up now.
Okay. Mitzi, welcome back, by the way.
Well, thank you. I have a question for staff, but maybe if we're going to go in this direction Commissioner Spring has described, I can hold that.
Well, I think it's still helpful if there are particular issues or questions that we want to raise, that we can raise them now and while people are listening, and I think there probably will be others, but go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead. I apologize because I'm coming into this still kind of in the middle of a process, but I'm a little puzzled that it's kind of just now coming to the planning department. I know from my experience as a professional planner and working with other colleagues around the country that we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There are best practices out there. And so I'm curious to know what best practices, if any, we've been able to secure, maybe through the Planning Advisory Service or other means, so that we have some way of benefiting from the experience of other planning professionals in other cities around the country who obviously have had to deal with this same issue.
Through the chair, Mrs. Barker, you bring up an interesting, or actually a good question there with the Planning Advisory Service. That's a question that we'll have to ask back on the working group if they consulted with, if they've looked at best practices or if they've just kind of gone on their own with this, and provide that information to the commission once we find out.
Yeah, I believe there's an entire PAS report that is dedicated just to this self-same issue.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
I'm not trying to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but what motion are we going to want to put on the floor here to postpone this matter so that we can get some time to sort through all of this and get comfortable with it?
Yeah, I think what I heard earlier was that we have some space on our is it March 14th?
That is correct. So
there's clearly our next meeting is next week. I think we all would recognize that's pretty quick, and the first meeting in March might be full or have a decent agenda.
It's a pretty full agenda on the March 7th.
And so I think ultimately we'll be asking for a motion to postpone to March 14th, and then also ask for a date to be established and noticed for a work session in advance of that meeting.
Okay, so I had two more
Yep.
items I was hoping to speak to. The first one was, did I hear something about a time constraint on this, or did I mishear that before the meeting?
Well, originally, and just to be clear, there's this committee that many people here have attended meetings when it was discussed, and Tony and I actually sit on the committee with some members of the Assembly. There was also a subcommittee of that group that delved just into cell towers, and they brought this back to the full committee. There's a hearing that's been introduced and noticed for February 23rd at the Assembly. But, if we're not done, we're not done. They can either postpone that or take testimony there. It doesn't make sense, frankly, to take testimony until we're closer to a revised document, so that you have a second opportunity. So I don't know what's pushing that, Hal, if you know, or is there any other reason other than that was just a goal that we wanted to hit?
Mr. Chair, it was a goal on the timeline that was set. We have a number of issues we want to deal with this year, and that's the primary how it got scheduled this way. I might also take the opportunity to mention there's been a couple of staff changes that have slowed the process up as well. So if you weren't aware of that, then just bringing that up, and I think that has slowed the transmission of some of the data too.
Well, that's fair. And I guess the only other thing I'd say is that some of the urgency is our own dissatisfaction with the current regulations as it relates to cell towers. So we all recognize that the longer it takes, the longer we have to deal with the ordinance as it currently exists. So, Brandon, was that it, or?
I had one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I may. So I guess this is kind of a request for staff, I guess, before our next meeting or work session or whatever it is that we're going to do on this issue would be kind of what we've been doing these grids where we have these various issues or points outlined. I was wondering if we could array what we'll call the Rogers Park suggestions against what AT&T and GCI, the feedback we got from them. It'd be really helpful. I mean, you can kind of toggle back and forth, but I don't know if there's time in the staff schedule to put that together. I know it's going to be complicated, but I thought I'd ask. So,
Through the chair, Mr. Walker, yeah, we can, look into that and try to come up with sort of a comparison between all those. We'll take all the comments from tonight.
Super, thank you.
Thanks, Danielle.
This is actually kind of a tag on to what you were just recommending, is that along with there being a comparison between what has already been proposed as an ordinance and then Rogers Park's comparison, I think incorporating kind of the best practices and more specifically what's happening in similar places to Alaska. I'm not as concerned as what's best practice for downtown LA is honestly never going to work for Anchorage. And so trying to find something that's not just what could be the best if we had the most developed city, but what is the best for a mountainous place with rugged terrain and varying distances where part of it can be a subdivision, part of it is a downtown area, and part of it are just even houses that are off the grid. So I think incorporating that into that review is something that would be very important to me.
Thank you. Mr. Spring.
Yeah, it sounds like we're kind of outlining the parameters of the work session, more or less. So just to add to that, there's one thing that we didn't hear tonight, and that was the MLP comments, and they provided a pretty extensive list of comments. I would hope that maybe at the work session that you could talk to them a little bit more about it. I don't know if it's appropriate to have them come and talk to us about their concerns, but I'd like to have some feedback about what they are, a little bit more detail about what they are, and are they really legitimate, or do you think that they misinterpret the code? Plus, maybe this was already mentioned, but DAS, the distributed antenna systems, come up over and over and over again. Is there any way we can come up with some, better information about the technology and how viable is it? I mean, I'm not sure we can. I'm not sure. I think there's always going to be a difference of opinion. But is there a way to find out more information about that system? Is it viable, as some people think it is? And can it really replace the monopoles?
Thanks, John. Mr. Walker, back in.
Yeah, I apologize. I missed one thing. So there's been a lot of talk about defining these various items, the physical aspects of these towers. And I know I think we've all seen various characteristics of these things in different cases, but I was also thinking it might be helpful if we had some standardized, definitions. And for my sake anyway, it always helps for me to see pictures. So if we had some kind of an illustration of what, when we're talking about a type 4, if that means it's camouflaged, to what degree, et cetera. I don't know, so maybe some diagrams or something to help us to understand that stuff so we're all talking in the same language. Again, sorry for lumping a bunch more work onto you here. But
Danielle.
This may have also been covered in some of the earlier requests, but I think it would also be helpful to get when we're talking about best practices and stuff, specifically looking at how we can incentivize uses that it seems like the community councils want, so that way, that seemed to be something that could be a compromised middle ground between the industry and the community. So finding a way to encourage that, I think, would be a good option.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess I would just add my list. Look, I know the process is challenging and difficult. Folks that representing the industry, sat through some of these meetings and actually provided some really good visuals and information and that technical knowledge that, frankly, is needed. And sounds like you may be asked to do it again. My list includes separation distances. This better need to clarify the types of categories, including truly, is there a need for a type 5 and type 6? Seems like we're sort of lacking with just the 1s through 4. Ability to satisfy demand with small cell in all types of neighborhoods. This notion of an engineer directly under contract with the municipality is a very different one. I understand why it's being asked for, but what's the municipality's response to that? What about our business districts? I have a hard time imagining type 3 tower in a business district. Frankly, just doesn't seem appropriate for an urban area, maybe a somewhat rural area. What are we allowed to do under federal law? We had testimony in a package delivered by Howard Levine that had some interesting counterpoints to some of the arguments that were made. We heard from industry saying, are we actually discouraging co-location by our height limitations? I think that's a big issue. I too need the visuals. I'm all for the best practices, and I think we ultimately better need to understand the technology as it exists today. What can it not do? And I think costs are part of it. We need to know that. And finally, on the standards and factors considered in granting a conditional use for antennas and tower structures, we didn't talk about it a lot. That's on page 10 and 11 of our packet, because what's proposed is basically to make most of these uses not permitted in residential use. So if you take them off the table, we don't have to go through this standard list. But is this really the list? And I asked members of the commission to reflect on this. How would you apply this? How would the private sector apply this? What does it mean, proximity to residential district boundaries? So you're allowed to be in a commercial district, but you can't be the first lot in, the second lot in, the third lot in. Again, surrounding tree coverage. How do you really? That's where you get into the subjective stuff that we all struggle with. Because I've yet to see one of these where people come up and say, that's exactly what I want in my neighborhood. So with that, if there's nothing else, I would take a motion to postpone to, I believe, March 14th. Mr. Walker, is that your motion?
Yes.
And that is seconded by Mitzi Barker. Any discussion? Hearing none, this item is postponed, and I think what we're also going to ask staff to do is try to find a date for a work session, hopefully something other than the evening of March 14th prior to the meeting. Thank you. Motion to adjourn, please. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Meeting's adjourned.